I already knew you were insane, but this was beyond reality. The comments showed up faster than a protagonist coming back stronger after a time skip. So here's part 2. And all of this is happening because of you always showing support with messages, likes, and shares. Seriously, the number of likes was bigger than the protagonist's stick. Not in that way. Wait. Anyway, now the only thing left to see, will you comment as much as before, or have you already burned all your energy on the other videos? Let's find out. Let's jump into the video before the author suddenly decides to go on an eternal hiatus.
Yo, what's up everyone? Ready to dive into another awesome story? Before we start, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of the new stuff coming up. And don't forget to comment on what stories you want to see next. Alright, let's get to it. Welcome to Chrono Life, a virtual reality game where only the strongest survive. Pretty much like the law of the jungle. GU logs into the game, only to get mocked by other players for his lack of experience, trash gear, and overall noob status. But when he upgrades his wooden stick to the max reinforcement level, plus 99, GU realizes he now has the power to split continents and wipe out entire armies with a single hit. Time to teach these idiots a lesson. Freedom, excitement, exploration, a whole new reality. The best fantasy VR game has just been released, Chrono Life. On his first time playing, the newbie gets publicly humiliated by a group he wanted to join. They call him a noob, saying they don't accept inexperienced players in their party. They also trash his gear and tell him to come back only when he upgrades his equipment to at least plus 11. Pissed off, the protagonist starts ranting about everything in the game. People around him start wondering what's up with the guy yelling to himself. Someone mentions that he's just frustrated because no one let him join their group, and soon enough, he becomes a joke. He keeps complaining that those guys don't know jack about the game's items, or how strong his sword actually is. He even spent a fortune on in-game purchases to get it. That's when a girl notices him and walks over. He asks who she is, and she says she wants him to join her party to go farming together. Suddenly, his whole opinion about the game changes. Now he's saying it's the best game ever. Which, to be fair, it totally is. Trust me. While exploring the forest, they start chatting about their items. She seems impressed. He then casually mentions that he actually took money from his parents yesterday and blew a ton of cash on in-game purchases. She asks how much he spent in total. He tells her not to freak out and then drops the number, 55,001, about $55, on the warrior starter pack, which came with his knight's two-handed sword. She compliments him, saying he's like a knight straight out of a fairy tale. And that's when the protagonist, absolutely losing it, starts picturing his whole future with her, kissing, proposing, getting married, and starting a family together. Just a little bit over the top, I'd say. They had finally arrived. He asked her where they were since they were in the middle of a forest, but at that moment, she suddenly stabbed her staff into his stomach. Shocked, he asked why she did that, and if she was after his weapon. She just laughed, mocking him, saying she didn't need a crappy weapon like that. Then she told him that from the very start, she only lured him there to kill him, bringing him to the center of the forest where no one was around. Devastated, he asked if she had been lying about wanting to farm together too. She just shrugged and said there was no point in lying. He was just a noob anyway. She kept going, saying she bet he was a loser in real life too. Then she added that she'd make sure to never see him again, and told him to go take more money from his parents to reinforce his trash weapons. If he sucked at the controls, the least he could do was have decent gear. She even remembered him saying he got the starter pack and figured that must mean his parents were broke losers too. The protagonist stood up, furious, and told her to shut up and keep his parents' names out of her mouth. But before he could finish, she sliced him in half with her staff, saying he shouldn't talk to her like that. Right after that, a message popped up saying she had completed her mission and would now advance to a secret class. Her appearance completely changed. She now looked like an angel. This class was called Goddess of Life. To achieve it, she had to kill 1,000 players. As she left, she mentioned she had just one more mission to finish. That day, the protagonist learned one thing. In this game, only the strong survive. Then, a warning message appeared, saying his character had died and lost a portion of his experience. He would be revived in a safe zone. When he respawned, he remembered everything the girl had said to him, as well as the people who had mocked him at the start of the game. Fueled by sudden rage, he pulled out a hammer from his inventory, one that allowed him to enhance his weapons. He started reinforcing his sword, but then a message appeared. Reinforcement failed. His weapon shattered into pieces. Frustrated, he tried the same with his gloves. Another failure. Consumed by endless fury, he kept doing it with every piece of his gear until he was left with nothing. Just as he was about to log out in defeat, a small branch fell beside him. A child, who seemed to be the one who dropped it, looked at him. Frustrated that even newbies pitied him now, he angrily struck the stick with his reinforcement hammer. This time, it succeeded. So he kept going tirelessly until the reinforcement level maxed out. A notification appeared, telling him he had reached the highest possible enhancement level for the item. He was stunned. This didn't make any sense. After plus 10, the success rate for reinforcement was less than 5%. Honestly, this game had some top-tier balance. Then, the stick slipped from his hands and fell to the ground. The moment it hit, the entire area was obliterated, leaving behind massive destruction, even causing a crack to form on the planet itself. Everyone nearby panicked, thinking a dragon had caused the devastation. Many speculated it was some kind of surprise in-game event. The entire continent felt the impact of that one stick. That day, a new world record was set in the history of virtual reality games. The protagonist received another in-game notification stating that he had assassinated another player, causing his reputation to drop. He quickly remembered the people who had humiliated him. Now it was his turn for revenge. In real life, he was nobody. He wasn't particularly handsome or tall, his grades weren't great, and he didn't stand out in sports either. If he had to classify himself using gaming terms, he'd be about a bronze. For that is a little bit sad, but he is basically a loser, in other words. While walking through the village in the game, a man stopped him, threatening him for being a newbie walking in front of him. The woman beside him laughed at the situation and told him to stop, saying he was scaring the kid. The protagonist called him fat and told him to let go. Then, he touched the man's head with his stick. The man, furious at his attempt to fight using a wooden stick, scoffed, but the next moment, his face was completely obliterated by the stick's colossal power, making him evaporate. Confident in himself, the protagonist claimed that he was now the main character of that world. However, right after, he received a game notification stating that his weapon had been gravely damaged and would soon break. His stick had 3/5 durability left and could not be repaired, leaving him in shock. Poor people never get a break. He was extremely frustrated. He realized that since the stick originally had a total durability of 5, and he had already used it twice, it had now dropped to 3. That meant he only had 2 more uses left before his weapon would shatter. Still, he wasn't discouraged. He was thirsty for revenge, and said that the remaining uses would be enough. Upon arriving at the Ravine of the Dead, a massive tremor struck, and a gigantic 2-headed dragon appeared. The dragon spoke, "For a mere mortal, you are quite courageous." That was the strongest monster in the game, the twin-headed dragon, Urus. As the beast threatened him, the protagonist made a simple movement with his stick, instantly destroying one of its heads. Now, he was determined to use one of his last attacks to kill the strongest boss in the game. The dragon, shocked, quickly spoke. "Wait! Listen to what I have to say." The protagonist was furious. "Just now, you were calling me a mere mortal, and now you want to be all polite?" The monster defended itself. "I was just following the script." Then, the dragon asked, "Who are you? How are you this strong?" The protagonist replied, "I don't know. Just shut up and die." And with that, he destroyed the dragon's body. As he complained about his weapon's low durability, the dragon's last remaining head took the opportunity to speak. "If durability is your problem, I definitely have a solution for you." Then, a new game notification appeared. A contract request has been sent. Urus wishes to offer his soul. The game asked if he accepted. The protagonist was confused and asked what that meant. The dragon then questioned, "Have you ever heard of an ego's sword?" He said no. The dragon continued, "It's a long and complicated story." The protagonist cut him off. "Summarize it." The dragon sighed. "Basically, I'll become your sword. I'll abandon my physical form, leaving only my soul, which will make the weapon have infinite durability. This sword is the highest ranking weapon in the entire game." The protagonist laughed at the situation. A plot twist like this, I had given up on revenge, but it seems like the heavens are begging me to go through with it. And so, he accepted the contract with the dragon. Now he has a stick with highest level and granting it infinite durability. The monster's minions rose up, declaring they would avenge their master, but all were easily defeated. A 10 billion gold bounty, approximately $8 million, was placed on the protagonist's head. His wanted poster had been distributed worldwide. All 12 kingdoms across the 3 continents had received the news. The strongest guilds in the game, composed of the most powerful players, raised their banners with a common goal. For the first time ever, the 5 top guilds had joined forces. The leader of the World Guild Alliance took command and gave his orders. The guilds would work together to capture the fugitive player, officially declaring war against the criminal. As the protagonist walked through a narrow alley, he had a small moment of happiness for obtaining the weapon of his dreams. Then, a purple head suddenly appeared on his staff. Startled, he asked who it was. The head immediately responded, it was Urus. As he had mentioned before, his soul was now inside the weapon, meaning he had become its spirit. The protagonist asked how he just popped out of nowhere in his weapon. The dragon explained that this was the main feature of ego rank weapons. Only the wielder could see and hear him. The protagonist then asked where his second head was. Looking around, the protagonist saw thousands of wanted posters plastered all over the village walls. His own head was now worth a bounty. He had become the most wanted criminal in the game. What a crazy turn of events, huh? The dragon's spirit spoke to him. You must be really strong, having killed 800,000 people with a single attack. That's something even I couldn't have imagined. And let's not forget that 10 billion gold bounty. That's just insane. The protagonist questioned him. Aren't you just an AI character? Should you really be talking about real-world money like that? I thought NPCs weren't supposed to mention things outside the game. Urus replied. I'm already dead anyway, so I don't really care about those details. Then he asked, so what are you going to do about this situation? With such a massive bounty, every player in the game is going to hunt you down. Maybe you should take advantage of this opportunity and wipe out humanity. The protagonist was still in shock over the absurd bounty amount, but convinced himself that it wasn't such a bad thing. Now, he felt like a celebrity. Since there was no turning back, he decided he would become a secretly overpowered person. The dragon asked what that meant. OP is a nickname for people with ridiculous strength, he explained. I'll still look like a noob, but I'll secretly have colossal power. Urus asked how he planned to hide his strength. Humans always look down on opponents who seem weak. The protagonist said that Urus had a lot to learn. That was the fun of it all. Then he asked, haven't you ever read a comic where the main character looks weak but has insane hidden powers? Then, an arrow was fired into the protagonist's back. The supreme commander of the 5 Guild Alliance, Hawkeye, had struck him. His soldiers marched forward, surrounding the protagonist with thousands of bows and arrows aimed at him. The commander sentenced him to imprisonment and confinement for having killed 800,000 players. The protagonist stood up, and as the soldiers charged at him with their spears, he turned to the dragon. Forget what I said earlier. He had planned to keep his powers a secret and live a peaceful life. But now, he had changed his mind. Raising his stick, he unleashed an explosion that wiped out the soldiers around him, and along with them, the capital of the first kingdom they were in. The commander quickly pulled an item from his inventory, the Link Orb. An item that could summon as many people as he wanted to his location. It cost 10 million gold. And he used it. A mass teleportation occurred. Suddenly, millions of soldiers and knights surrounded the protagonist. The World Guild Alliance had arrived, approximately 3 million members. The commander gave the order to attack. The protagonist raised his stick, and in an instant, a massive portion of them were wiped out. The dragon was shocked. Even though he had been the strongest boss monster in the game, even he couldn't handle millions of enemies at once. And these weren't just any enemies. These were the highest-ranking players in the world. Even if he had summoned all his minions, defeat would have been inevitable. The protagonist is inevitable. They attacked together. But one failure after another led to their defeat. The Mage Guild attempted to contain him, casting a summoning spell to drop a series of high-level incantations on him. But he simply raised his weapon again and repelled their magic. They tried another spell. The protagonist noticed and struck them down with his stick again. He had finally defeated every single one of them. It was 1 against 3 million. The commander lay on the ground, unable to believe what had just happened. The protagonist spoke. "I'll let you live." The commander questioned him. "Why?" The protagonist smirked. "Because you were the one who shot that arrow into my back." Then, the protagonist smashed his face with his stick. That day's battle became legend. Not just for the players of Chrono Life, but for gamers all over the world. Even people who knew nothing about games had heard of it. The dragon was in awe of what the protagonist had done, and praised him. The protagonist finally asked, "Where the hell were you? What were you doing this whole time?" Then, a woman approached him. The same one who had betrayed him at the start of the game. "A reunion worth remembering, huh?" The sun sets over the vast plains, countless scattered lances strewn across the ground, 3 million cold, dead bodies lay sprawled out, and finally, the protagonist had crossed paths with that girl again. In his mind, it was a scene straight out of an action movie. Remembering what she had said about her parents, anger began to swell within him, but all he could do was laugh. She asked how he had been and remarked that it was a coincidence they were seeing each other again in a place like this. He contradicted her, saying that she had clearly come looking for him, and she questioned whether that was really how it appeared. The protagonist confessed that at that moment he only wanted to crush her skeleton, but since they were talking, he asked about her hair change and whether she had dyed it. She said she was glad he noticed and that after she had killed, she had advanced in class, and once she did that, the color of her hair changed suddenly. The protagonist asked about her becoming the goddess of life after killing 1,000 players, and suggested that she should actually be called the goddess of death. She admitted it was a really funny thing, and then he charged at her, but without success in finishing her off. She appeared behind him, saying she still had a lot to tell him, and he continued attacking without stopping, yet still had no effect on her. She was impressed and said he had gotten much stronger than before, but it still wasn't enough to kill her. He commented that he found it strange because he knew she had been hit by his attack. It didn't make sense for her to still be standing without a scratch. She replied that she had now become a goddess, and no human could kill her, which only irritated him further, making him charge at her again. Another flurry of attacks occurred, but still with no effect. She then spread her wings and claimed to be sure that he hadn't stopped thinking about her since the day they met, and that his desire to kill her was immense. She continued, asking him to give up, saying it didn't matter how many times he tried. No matter how strong he became, he would never be able to kill her. He then turned his back on her and began to walk away. She questioned where he was going, and he said that this time he would attack with all his power. She asked if he hadn't heard her explanation, but he justified that he wasn't going to kill her, but rather destroy the entire planet, since he couldn't defeat her directly. So that was his only way out. She questioned whether he believed a mere human could do such a thing, and he reaffirmed that this time he would go with all his power, that until now he hadn't even used half of it, and she began to take it seriously. The goddess said that if he destroyed the planet, he would also end up dead, and that wouldn't be revenge but rather suicide. She asked if he would go so far just to satisfy his desire for revenge, commenting that his previous death was only the price of ignorance. He started laughing, remembering that only the strongest survive, and told her to listen now. He claimed it was time to teach her a lesson. There were always trolls, like her, who didn't seem to understand how things worked. He then raised his stick and said he had nothing to lose, and she shouldn't mess with someone who had nothing to lose. She then asked him to wait, but it was too late, and he directed his attack with all his strength to the ground, causing the complete destruction of the planet, turning it into cosmic dust. That was the end of the sweet times. At that moment, back in the real world, many people who were at a virtual reality arcade began to complain that they had been kicked out of the game, asking the manager what was going on and whether he had cut the power. He asked everyone to calm down, and they all concluded that the game server had probably crashed. They wondered if there was any reason for this. When they checked their phones, They saw that the game's website had posted an announcement claiming they had to perform emergency maintenance on the server and apologize for interrupting their gameplay, stating they would provide an update as soon as possible. A player count list appeared on what remained of the server, showing that only one player was left. The protagonist, lost among the binary codes, didn't know where he was, but while he was asking himself questions, someone said ST-389. That was the name of the planet he had destroyed, famous even in the fourth universe for its beauty. The person asked why he had done that, and a mysterious voice said that planet was his mother's favorite place. The protagonist asked who he was, and the guy started laughing maniacally. Joker vibes. That person referred to himself as a god. The protagonist replied that he didn't care who or what he was, and asked if he had seen a girl with black hair around. He denied it, saying that only the two of them were left, and asked why the protagonist was so shocked since he was the one who had killed everyone there. He prompted him to reflect on the chances of surviving a global explosion. The protagonist interrupted, laughing, happy with his revenge, and called out to Urus to celebrate, but got no response. The mysterious person said it was just the two of them in that room, which meant his little friend had also died. The protagonist then asked why he was there too, since it only showed one player online, and questioned if he was an NPC or an admin. The person denied being either, and when he tried to reveal himself, he mentioned that someone was interrupting him. He said he had to leave, and that their meeting that day had a good reason behind it, bidding farewell, and asking the protagonist to say hi to the hairy man for him before disappearing. The protagonist was then disconnected from the game and questioned why that person had appeared and left so suddenly, wondering who the hairy man was that had been mentioned earlier. He finally got disconnected from the spot where he had been playing. Upon exiting his gaming capsule, he found a man accompanied by 3 security guards in front of him. This mysterious guy called out his name, talked about his age, and commented that he had been playing the game for 3 months, and that his current weapon was a plus 99 wooden stick. After all these comments, the man asked if it was really him, and the protagonist confirmed, asking who he was too. He replied that he was the man there to take away his wooden stick. This guy took him out to dinner. The protagonist couldn't eat, and the man noticed, asking if something was wrong and telling him to eat something, mentioning that the woman who owned that restaurant made excellent food. He finally managed to eat something. The man said he used to go there whenever he didn't have money, which meant he had been going there for 15 years, since the first time he went to that place was when he opened the Chrono Life company during its early development stages. The protagonist soon realized who he was, and the man said he forgot to introduce himself, stating that he was Deokbi Choi, the CEO of Chrono Life. The legend himself. The protagonist was shocked by this revelation, as he thought he was dealing with a gang leader. He quickly asked who the men in suits with him were, and the man replied that they were the people who worked on the game. The protagonist then inquired what the CEO of that game wanted with him. The man responded that he had already mentioned this at the arcade. He was there to confiscate his wooden stick. Noticing the protagonist's shock, he asked why he hadn't expected that since the item was abnormal and needed to be removed. Still surprised by the revelations, the protagonist commented that it didn't make sense since he had reinforced it by himself. The man explained that once he reached the plus 10 reinforcement level, the success rate for the next level would be 3%, and that percentage only continued to rise. So, it didn't make sense that he had succeeded with such a low percentage unless it was a bug, and now they were going to confiscate his item. Meanwhile, some players in the virtual game were gathered in a group to kill a monster. The group's mage hit it with a strong fire spell, and the knight congratulated her for hitting it right on target. They just needed one more good attack. Then, another person in the group charged at the monster with bare hands, but the creature flung them away, causing them to crash down onto the mage. The protagonist watched the group from a distance. Now he was back in the game with his stick and Urus. During the earlier conversation with the game's CEO, he confessed that the removal of his stick was solely the company's wish, but he had a different idea. After doing some studying, he realized it was a normal item and not a bug, so they decided not to interfere with players anymore since the events were the players' own choices. While he was enjoying a soup, he mentioned that he liked to add special sauce to it, and had the freedom to do so if he wanted. He wanted to give him the same sense of freedom while playing, but at that moment, the restaurant owner appeared, complaining about him putting that sauce in the soup and hitting him on the back of the neck. That's one way to spice up a meal. Back to the players fighting the monster, the group now gathered to complain about the fighter who had rushed in without thinking, claiming she knew she had to hold her position during team battles. They all joined forces to kick her out of the group. Earlier, the CEO confessed that he had only one request. He truly believed they had done a great job turning Chrono Life into a fun game. It was an epic fantasy world that everyone dreamed of visiting at least once in their lifetime. He then proposed to the protagonist to stop destroying things and just enjoy the game, to have fun with the true purpose of the game. Just the basics. In the game again, the knight of the group spat at the fighter they had expelled, and they left the area. Seeing that, the protagonist declared that he would do things his way from now on. He then tried to use the power of his stick, but was startled when the fighter yelled, complaining about the game. Coincidentally, she used the same arguments he had in his first playthrough, creating a connection between them. As she left to farm alone, just as he had suggested, the monster group they had attacked earlier gathered again. At that moment, the protagonist, wearing only underwear and a cape, jumped in front of her and defeated them with the power of his stick. For the first time in that game, he felt a bit of fun and asked her if she wanted to join his group. Talk about a heroic entrance. She denied him, raising her middle finger and claiming she wouldn't play with noobs before walking away. News of his feats in that game was still reverberating around the world, with many questioning whether he was just a hacker since it didn't make logical sense to kill 3 million people alone. Most of them called for him to be banned, claiming he was probably cheating. The game's website then issued a statement saying that the player they were reporting was completely normal. After an investigation, they discovered that he hadn't done anything wrong during the game, which left everyone shocked. People inside the game were discussing how the game server had been taken down because of that guy, who apparently had killed many players at once. Many disbelieved it was possible, but most said it was true. Many of them wanted to see what he looked like in the game, but couldn't because of his hooded cloak. A classic disguise, but apparently effective. The protagonist was still following that fighter, and she got annoyed by it. When she questioned him about it, he replied that he was just going to farm with her. She reinforced her argument again, calling him a noob since he wasn't wearing any appropriate gear and had only a wooden stick. She said she didn't have time to waste on losers like him. He questioned her, still not believing she thought he was weak since he had saved her from the group of monsters earlier. However, Urus intervened, saying that during the attack, she had her eyes closed, so she probably didn't see what he did. He felt happy to hear that since he could maintain his status of anonymity. He then approached her and asked for help, saying he didn't know much about the game and was a newbie. He tried to convince her by calling her a professional at what she did. Urus asked what he was doing, and he confessed he was pretending to be weak. The girl became so full of herself that she said, as a professional, it was her responsibility to help other players, and then invited him to her group. Pure humility. The two entered a dungeon together. The girl struck the monsters present with her special gloves, defeating them easily. With her skills, she managed to take down all 4 at the same time, still full of herself for being called a professional. The protagonist sat back and watched the fight, commenting to Urus that she seemed strong since even fighting low-level monsters could be dangerous when taking on several at once like she was. Noticing he was just sitting there doing nothing, she got irritated and walked over to complain, telling him to at least try to help her with his stick. He tried to play the pity card, saying his stick wouldn't do anything to monsters that size. However, she said if he wanted to get stronger faster, he needed to fight too and questioned whether he wanted to remain a noob forever. The girl received a message notifying her that there were 10 minutes left until she had to log off, urging her to wrap up her game and hurry. She then informed him that she needed to step out for a bit, saying she'd be back in 30 minutes, and asked him to at least fight some monsters until she returned. The prota said to Urus that he wanted to know how she made a living, still unable to believe she had spent 100 million won, about $8,000, on a game like that. Urus replied that she probably came from a wealthy family. Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy virtual weapons. When she logged off from the game, she was in a room, and remembering the protagonist walking alongside her and complimenting her made her smile like a goofball. Just then, a woman entered her room, asking what was wrong with her, apparently very angry because she was still in bed playing. She questioned whether she wanted to ruin her career, which sparked a discussion, but it quickly ended since she only had 10 minutes to get ready. The woman helped her with the preparations, fixing her hair and putting on makeup. Such a sweetheart, at least sometimes. The next presentation was the music festival, and the star attraction had held the #1 spot on social media for 13 weeks. She was a super idol and the most talented songwriter of her age, and then she entered, Sarung Han. The audience went wild when she appeared. However, this super idol had a hobby that probably most of the audience had no idea about: online gaming. The protagonist was still in the dungeon and declared it was time to practice a bit while she was away. He then began training, focusing on killing as many monsters as possible with just one hit. Overkill is just his style. The idol was 17 and attending high school. She had entered the music industry at a young age, and, after a long time without recognition for her talents, she was now the hottest star of the moment. During an interview, she reached the impressive milestone of 14 weeks at #1. The interviewer congratulated her on the achievement, saying it was quite a feat, and commented that the way she wrote her songs had a significant impact on people because her lyrics felt very genuine. He asked her how it was to deal with that after gaining fame. She responded that she enjoyed spending a lot of time alone at home, usually reading poetry or fairy tales in her free time. The interviewer continued, noting that besides her music career, she was also famous for her acting career, and he had heard she was cast in a new drama called Dirty Mouth Teen. She confirmed, saying she was very excited to start the new project. What a peculiar drama title, right? The idol returned to the virtual world and began lecturing the protagonist, pushing him to train much harder. She used games to relieve stress from her daily life. Urus asked the protagonist why he didn't just escape this situation, and he replied that he was still trying to maintain his secret identity and needed to pretend to be weak. As they walked through the cave, she asked if he had killed any monsters while she was gone. She then asked him to put it into practice now, but before they started she asked for his name. She interrupted him, saying she would call him Panty. As they ventured deeper into the dungeon, a mysterious group was following them, claiming they had finally found her. One of the mysterious figures asked the leader what they should do now, and he replied that justice would be served today. When they found the monster in the cave, she ordered the protagonist to charge at it, which he did. When he went to strike the monster, he lightly tapped his stick on its head, causing it to explode. She was thrilled with his achievement, saying he had really gotten stronger. However, at that moment, a spear was thrown toward them. She grabbed him by the shirt and diverted the spear's trajectory, then kicked it back, hitting the face of the mysterious group's leader. Talk about a plot twist. The mysterious figure complimented her and suggested she should be very grateful for the equipment she had. She asked who he was, and he asked again if she had forgotten his voice, which made him sad. They were members of the Hallison Guild, and it had been a while since they had last met. The leader then ordered everyone to advance on them. The girl told the protagonist to fall back, claiming that things would get dangerous from here on out. She stood her ground and managed to take down one of the advancing members, using her special ability to take out a large number of them. Then everyone charged in at once to try to defeat her. It wasn't the first time this group had attacked them, nor was it the first time they had lost. The man who seemed to be the leader refused to give up and always returned to seek revenge. At least that's what the protagonist believed. The most important thing was that everyone seemed weak. When she defeated them all, the leader stood up, accompanied by a woman, and said that everything was going according to plan. Now that she was off guard, he instructed the woman to move in. As she approached the girl, she extended her hand and activated a skill called Steal, making the girl's special gloves disappear and land in the hands of the mysterious woman. She commented that they were of very high quality and asked if she was rich or something. The protagonist was impressed with the skill she used, and Urus was also surprised, stating that it wasn't normal for that skill to be so strong. He felt at ease, claiming that there was nothing to steal from him. He only had his underwear and a cape. However, he remembered his wooden stick and clutched it tightly, running away. The leader told the woman to ignore him, as he seemed to be a novice player with little experience and likely not much good equipment. She became intrigued by him and tossed the girl's gloves to the leader, saying it would be more fun to steal from the poor. Then she advanced toward him, asking where he was going, and pointed her hand at him. In that moment, he attempted to attack with his stick, but she was quicker and managed to steal it from him. But when she took his weapon, Urus's spirit activated, haunting her by calling her an arrogant human and questioning how she dared to steal from him. She threw the stick to the ground in fear, and the protagonist retrieved his weapon. The spirit took on its peaceful form, visible only to the protagonist, showing that it was furious for having been robbed. He calmed it down. The woman was still dazed by what had happened, questioning whether it was an illusion, but she knew it felt too real to just be a trick of the mind. The leader asked what she was doing on the ground, questioning if she had forgotten her job. She quickly got back up, claiming to be a mercenary who only worked for money. However, with her guard down, the girl attacked from behind, intending to retrieve her gloves. The mercenary said she didn't have them anymore and pointed to the leader, who was holding them. The protagonist then knocked her out by lightly tapping his stick on her head and set his plan in motion to defeat everyone without them knowing he was strong. He took them all down with a single hit from his stick, as always. The mercenary was shocked by this, and he took her down too. The protagonist said he had been very patient since meeting the girl, and that mercenary had ruined the rest of what he had. He then proceeded to destroy the entire cave with another swing of his stick. Talk about making an exit. The girl woke up startled, finding the protagonist sitting behind her in a tree, eating. He noticed she was finally awake. She asked where they were, and what had happened to the people who had attacked them. He replied that they were long gone and had left some time ago. She questioned why they had left and why she had been knocked out, only waking up now. He then returned her gloves and asked her to tell him everything she knew about the guild. She asked when he had become so confident, but since it was her fault he got attacked, she decided to share. She asked if he knew what the ancient lineage was. He didn't understand, but Urus explained that it referred to when an old guy played this game. The protagonist asked Urus how he knew that being just an NPC, and Urus replied that he had researched it on Wikipedia. He then launched into a long explanation about what it meant, but when he noticed the lost expression on the protagonist's face, the girl clarified that it was a type of player who spent billions of won in the game. This was the main characteristic of such players, and all the members of that guild that attacked them were part of this group. The girl explained that she had randomly crossed paths with them a few months back, and since then, that guild had been following her constantly. But they weren't just old men. They didn't know much about the game, which was why she was able to win all the confrontations. Finally, she asked how he had gotten her gloves back, and if he had stolen them back from them. He answered that they had just been left behind. She didn't quite understand, but said she was sure they would return. The protagonist mentioned that something still felt off about the story. He didn't understand why they wanted to steal her gloves so badly. She replied that it was because they cost 10 million gold. He retorted that's why it was strange. These people were used to spending, so theoretically, there was no reason to try to steal something that cost millions. There had to be another reason behind it. Inside the Hallis and Guild's base, the previous leader received a blow to his stomach from another person and knelt, begging for forgiveness from his boss, and pleading for another chance. The man told him to shut up, claiming there was no time to waste, and asserted that one of the other 4 guardians would take this mission in his place. Others entered the room, mocking him for failing to complete such an easy mission, questioning how this man was even one of them, using the argument that he was a poor guy who only spent 100 million won. Another suggested he should be expelled, and the failure to do so resulted in the mission's failure. One remained silent, while one of them advised the fallen man to think bigger and question the mercenary he had hired, already expecting him to be defeated for hiring someone so cheap. The silent one then offered to complete the mission in his place. He was confident, claiming he would bring back what he was asked for before lunch. The chief started to laugh, telling them to begin the mission, and asking them to show the true fear that their guild carried. The protagonist was hiding in the room and suddenly appeared, laughing at all of them and calling them ridiculous. He found it even funnier the names they used. The chief asked who he was, and how he had gotten in there. The protagonist replied that he would leave that for their imaginations to answer. He then said that if they continued to go after their boss, it would make his job of hiding his powers a bit more difficult, and questioned if they knew how hard it would be for him to come up with another excuse. He mocked them again for calling themselves the 4 guardians, and asked them not to prolong the story, claiming he would finish it quickly. The chief insisted that he didn't know what he was getting into, and ordered everyone to kill him. As they advanced towards him, wielding armor and weapons that probably cost billions, the protagonist remained calm, just waiting for his moment to strike with his stick. A mysterious figure was walking towards the cabin they were in, humming a tune while the guild members were being defeated by a man wielding nothing but a simple stick, wearing only a pair of underwear and a cape. As she got closer, he delivered more blows to everyone present. Finally, with a powerful swing of his stick, he destroyed the cabin by striking the ground, using a bit of his total strength. The mysterious person approaching the cabin revealed herself to be a girl, who was very surprised by the destruction of the cabin so quickly. This girl soon revealed herself to be the goddess of healing, who had fought against the protagonist shortly before he had destroyed the entire world of the game with just one blow. Enjoying the story so far? Then leave a like to show some love and comment on what you think. Don't forget to subscribe, so you don't miss out on the next amazing stories. Even after the sequence of attacks and the explosion, the chief had survived. As soon as he got up from the rubble, he summoned all the members of the Hallis and Guild. When they arrived at the scene, the first thing they did was attack the protagonist. He simply took a deep breath and told them that if they wanted to kill him, they would need at least 3 million members. He raised his stick again and defeated them all. The guild leader was in a state of complete shock, unable to understand how all those members with good equipment were defeated so easily. Even the weakest and newest member had spent around 10 million on his items, and all of them together could still fight against the 5 best guilds. Yet, a simple stick was taking them all down simultaneously. As he tried to comprehend how this was possible, he was surprised when he remembered it was the man from the wanted poster he had seen throughout his entire game. He recalled his own history, from the first time he played an online game back in his second year of school. At that time, the games weren't as realistic as today's. There weren't as many quests or groups. All they did was farm to level up. Even that simple routine was a lot of fun. He used to be monitored by his parents to prevent him from playing all night. He still remembered spending weekends at the internet cafe with his friends all day just to level up. As time passed, he grew older, and with age came many responsibilities. Once he became an adult and started working, he had no time for anything outside his job. During his work hours, one of his employees entered his office holding an old computer. He worked harder than anyone he knew, so he wanted to reward himself with a bit of nostalgia. The employee asked why he had requested such an old computer, saying they could have used one of the new ones to play online. He explained it was all about the vibe. When he turned on the computer, his heart began to race. It felt like he was transported back to his childhood, like returning to his first love. But he wasn't the only one who had grown over time. After defeating all the guild members, the protagonist approached the chief and another surviving leader, questioning why they stole from others even when they had enough money. He then warned them it was time for the old men to take their licks. He raised his stick and pressed it against the chief's head, knocking him down, and declared that from that day forward, the guild was finished. He ordered them to stop going after the girl to make it easier for him to maintain his disguise, and began to leave the area. However, as he was exiting, the chief stood up and asked if he was the one who had annihilated all the members of the 5 best guilds in the world, 3 million players. He proceeded to ask how much money the protagonist had spent to achieve that level of power, certain that he must have used an exorbitant amount. The protagonist claimed he didn't know what he was talking about, but said he had spent a bargain on his money. The chief asked for the amount, imagining it could be trillions, and the protagonist replied that he spent 55,000 won on the initial warrior package. Upon hearing this, the chief burst out laughing and asked the other leader how many games they had played besides the one they were currently in. When he replied that they had played 8, the chief affirmed that this one was their best, and things were starting to get truly interesting. The goddess, who had been listening quietly, agreed, saying that the game was the best of all. She then asked how their planned preparations were going. He responded that they were going well, but from now on, they would give up everything and would no longer cooperate with her. Upon hearing this, she raised her staff and split it in half. When she heard the other leader shout for his chief, she killed him too for being too loud. A notification appeared on the protagonist's screen, congratulating him for reaching the maximum level. He didn't quite understand what it meant and asked Urus if he knew anything about it, allowing him to see his public stats. When they saw he was at level 999, they were in complete shock. Chrono Life was first in the number of online players at the same time, first in registered players, first in sales, and first in dissatisfaction, thus being named the best virtual reality game in the world. At least, that was the context provided by an interviewer while asking a professional player of the game, Faker, about being almost at the maximum level. He claimed it was impossible. Players around the world were trying day and night to achieve that feat, but so far, no one had succeeded. Even if all the professionals in the game farmed for 24 hours straight, it would likely take decades to reach that level. Urus's first reaction upon seeing the protagonist's maximum level was to comment that he had just become the first player in the world to reach the maximum level, feeling happy to realize that he truly had potential. The protagonist still couldn't believe it, since just a little while ago, he was at level 7. But it made a lot of sense. On the first day he picked up that stick, he had killed about 800,000 people, and not only that, he also defeated countless monsters in the dungeons of the world. Plus, he gained experience for defeating the strongest boss monster in Chrono Life, Urus, and for killing his legion, the strongest in the entire game. On top of that, he gained experience for taking out all the members of the Global Guild Alliance, which totaled around 3 million players, and finally, the destruction of the planet. That's how the first player reached the final level of the game. After receiving this message, another one popped up, stating that now that he had reached the maximum level, he would enter the Ascension plan. And just like that, he was teleported to another location. An idol was lying on a grassy field, gazing at the stars, complaining that she was getting really bored waiting for Calcinia. She remembered he had told her he would be back soon, and then said he only had 1 hour to return, or she would leave. It wasn't right for a professional like her to be kept waiting like that. The protagonist had been sent to ruins he had never seen before, and immediately started complaining about being dragged around against his will in this game. First, he had to meet that strange guy who claimed to be a god, and then he met the game CEO, Urus, who commented on how popular he had become. A mysterious voice greeted him, calling him a human pup, saying it didn't expect to receive someone so soon and praising his achievement. The figure revealed itself to be a kind of humanoid being with blue skin and multiple arms, wearing what seemed to be the best gear in the game. It welcomed the protagonist with open arms, declaring itself the god of classes, the guide of the ascended. Once again, it praised his journey so far, acknowledging that despite his setbacks, he had reached the maximum level as a beginner, which was admirable. Urus asked the protagonist if it was true that he was a newbie, to which he confirmed, explaining that he hadn't progressed in class advancements. Then, another message appeared, congratulating him and stating that he would advance to a secret class. The stones around him began to float toward him, and more messages started appearing, indicating that the souls of all the weapons in the game had entered his body. Being consecrated as the master of newbies, he was granted special benefits. All his stats would be reset, and he would now have 3 times the skill points he previously had to use, totaling 14,985 points. Urus was surprised by this, and the protagonist commented that he seemed more interested in those points than in his secret class. He explained that it was because he only earned 5 skill points per level up. So even if someone else reached the maximum level, their level would still technically be 3 times lower than his, and he asked how the protagonist could remain so calm. While Urus awaited a response, the protagonist allocated all the points he had gained into just one stat. The CEO of the game was in his office enjoying a cup of tea when one of his employees entered, alerting him that he needed to see something related to that player. He followed the employee to the office, where, upon looking at the computer, he noticed that the player had already reached the maximum level. However, the employee mentioned that this wasn't the problem and asked him to see what the protagonist was doing. When he looked, he started laughing, saying that the kid knew how to have fun. The employees in the room grew very concerned, stating that this was no laughing matter and that they should take some precautions. The CEO then asserted that they, as game developers, shouldn't dictate how their players would play, and he left the room, thinking that not even in his wildest dreams did he imagine the player would put all his points into that stat. He was pleased that, for the first time in history, they had a good example of both the best and worst player possible. The god told the protagonist that this was the last step of his journey with him, and that he would now have a decision to make. This decision was to select one of the ascended weapons he was holding. The protagonist was excited and began to decide which one to take, but then asked the god to give him all of them. The god refused, and the protagonist threatened to throw the weapons on the ground before he defeated him. Everyone was shocked by what he said, and the game sent a message notifying that he had angered the god of classes, and he had now become his enemy. The god, irritated by the situation, charged at the protagonist. However, he simply raised his stick and repelled the attack, stunning him. It was revealed that the stat he had allocated all his points to was called Constitution. The effects of this stat increased his health and regeneration, making him immune to negative effects. Urus realized he had made a huge mistake and had ruined his character. In this game, every piece of equipment had a certain weight, and since his class didn't focus on strength, he needed to increase his strength stats to equip those items. So, basically, he could equip nothing now except for the cloak and the stick, and the protagonist said that was all he needed. Another notification appeared, informing him that he had met all the requirements for a secret skill called Healing Factor, which allowed the user to recover from all damage received and made them immune to effects like poison and paralysis. The god recovered from the previous attack and fired a lightning bolt from his eyes at the protagonist. Urus, scared, asked if he was okay, but then he began to laugh, saying this was the best game of all time. He then started suffering a series of attacks from the entity, but since his regeneration skill was on another level, none of it had any effect on him. He thanked the god for teaching him many things and ordered him to drop the weapons again, but the god refused once more. The protagonist then killed him with his stick, destroying the ascension plan and being sent back to his original location. Now he had all the ascended weapons. While he was happy with his achievement, the idol appeared, emanating an aura of anger, asking how he could have made her wait so long. He appeared behind her, saying he was back, but was soon interrupted by a punch to his face. He tried to justify himself, saying he thought she had left. She, furious about the situation, decided to log out of the game, warning him that she would be back at 7:30 p.m., and it was best for him to be there exactly at that time. The protagonist then decided to log out of the game as well. It was almost midnight. As he walked home, he felt happy to have finished another gaming session, claiming it was the best game ever. He was thinking about the amount of money he could make by selling the ascended weapons he had acquired since he was the first person to get them, and could demand whatever price he wanted. Unfortunately, he remembered that these weapons were linked to his character, meaning he couldn't get rid of them. While walking, he passed by the restaurant he had visited before and remarked that he was hungry. When he checked his wallet, he realized he had nothing. He complained about being born poor and walked away. He then remembered the price of his friend's equipment in the game and imagined what would happen if he sold his game items to transfer the money to real life. With that thought, he dashed back to the arcade. Upon entering the game again, he promised himself that his days of being poor were over, and he began farming with his character. The protagonist started by defeating the strongest monsters in Urus's legion, easily collecting tons of expensive items. Urus praised him for defeating them all effortlessly, and the protagonist mentioned that he had just begun. Then the monsters respawned, and he quickly defeated them again. In the past, he had attended an interesting lecture at Harvard University about Bill Gates, the world-famous billionaire known as the creator of Microsoft. It was said that he made $150 per second, and this informative lecture sparked financial awareness in the protagonist. By the end of his farming session, he had amassed an immense pile of items, which he calculated would be worth approximately 15 billion won. It may have only been for a brief moment, but he managed to make more money than Bill Gates. The first place he visited in real life was a Gucci boutique, where he bought numerous luxury items. He then purchased a luxury car, and as he drove through the streets, people were impressed because they had never seen that model before. However, he still wasn't a good driver and crashed the car into a pole, but he quickly bought another one afterward. In a meeting at the game company, a graph showing the losses caused by the protagonist was presented to the CEO, and everyone was trying to figure out how to stop him from causing these problems. His phone rang, and when he answered, the protagonist asked how he was doing. He mentioned that he was going to spend his money, and was thinking about buying a gift for him, asking if he needed anything. All he got in response were insults, and the call was abruptly ended. At that moment, the protagonist's only problem was figuring out how to spend his money. Then he remembered the most important thing to do. He bought the most luxurious apartment he could find. He decided to go to his neighbor's apartment to offer a piece of cake, claiming he was celebrating. When the door opened, he came face to face with the most beautiful girl he had ever seen in his life, who coincidentally looked a lot like the girl he played with. However, neither of them recognized each other at that moment, and it went unnoticed. In the game, a humanoid figure appeared in the ruins of Urus, claiming to be his lost head and vowing to eliminate all humans from the game. Back in the real world, the idol entered her apartment, and her manager asked who was at the door. She replied that it was the new neighbor offering a piece of cake, and called the gesture a bit cheesy. Still, the girl felt a strange sense of familiarity. She was sure she had seen the guy somewhere before. Her manager then told her to take off her school uniform because they had work to do. The idol questioned if she was just a money-making machine, since it had only been 30 minutes since she got back from school. Her manager responded that she could push it back if she wanted, but she figured she'd want to be done by 7:30 p.m. so she could get back to her game. Reluctantly, the idol agreed and got ready. When the protagonist logged back into the game, he realized that all the monsters he had been farming had disappeared. Confused, he asked Urus what had happened. Urus also found it strange since all the monsters in the game were programmed to respawn indefinitely. Then, the protagonist remembered he had to meet the girl at 7:30. It was then revealed that Urus's lost head had been absorbing every monster in its path. Eventually, it came across the goddess of life. When she tried to speak with it, the creature attacked her, attempting to absorb her as well. However, the game displayed an alert stating that the absorption had failed. She then appeared behind him, questioning how he dared to attack his own mother. Urakan, as the creature was now called, simply remarked that she smelled similar to him. Ignoring his comment, she advised him to head to the nearest village to feed. With that, Urakan set off toward the humans. When he arrived at the village, his impact caused a massive explosion. At the game's headquarters, the CEO was informed that they were being flooded with complaints, not just through customer support but on every social platform possible. Players were all reporting the same issue. They were being annihilated by a single monster with no way to defend themselves. The staff scrambled to apologize, calling it an unforeseen issue. Inside the game, the goddess of life stood beside Urakan, surprised that he had wiped out everyone in an instant. He stated that he needed more and asked if she knew a better place to feed. She replied that there was someone who could satisfy his hunger. At the meeting spot, the idol waited. The protagonist was already 13 minutes late. Sensing another presence, she assumed it was him, only to turn around and come face to face with Urakan, who was now level 999, while she was only level 24. The goddess stood alongside the creature and greeted the idol, addressing her by her game name, Love. The girl immediately asked if she knew the protagonist, as he was the only one who called her that from time to time. The woman speculated that they must be very close. Love then started talking to the monster, and a moment later, the creature attacked, absorbing her in an instant. After that, the two began to leave the area, but the protagonist suddenly appeared behind them, asking where they were going. The goddess smiled, saying she had missed him, and asked how he was doing. He immediately told her to shut up. Then, noticing that she was stepping on his friend's scarf, he politely asked her to get her filthy paws off of it. She claimed it was an accident. The protagonist then launched an attack at the monster, so powerful that it caused a crack in the planet itself. Yet, the creature remained standing. The goddess introduced him as her son. Urakan struck the protagonist directly, but his abilities healed him as if nothing had happened. The protagonist was still trying to process how a monster had taken his attack unscathed. The creature simply remarked that it wasn't a big deal, he just needed to dodge the attacks. He then stated that the protagonist would never land a proper hit on him with that kind of attack. The protagonist acknowledged that the monster was fast and decided to increase his power. The creature scoffed, saying he wasn't intimidated and asked if he was trying to claim he hadn't been using his full potential. The protagonist confirmed that all of his previous attacks had been normal strikes. Then, he activated every sword skill he had acquired so far, declaring that, for the first time, he was going to use an actual skill. He warned the monster that this was going to hurt and advised him to do his best to dodge. With his skill activated, he sped up his attacks. As he remembered the moments he had shared with his friend, his power became so intense that it destroyed a neighboring planet. Hawkeye started a live stream inside the game. As soon as he introduced himself, The viewers immediately began mocking him for his previous failures as a guild commander. The game had a messaging system that was available to all players. Anyone who logged in could use it. Ignoring the mockery, he got straight to the point. He asked his viewers if they thought a 1 versus 3 million fight was possible. The chat exploded with people asking if he had seen the developer's statement about the issue. He confirmed that he had, but questioned why they should believe them. Then, he began to expose them, claiming that the devs only saw players as a source of money. To support his argument, he showed the forum complaints about the overpowered monster that had been slaughtering players. He then declared that he was going to hunt down that monster to expose the developers. Even after the protagonist's massive attack, the creature was still alive, but this time, it wasn't unharmed. The protagonist demanded to know who it was, and the creature finally admitted that it was the lost head of Urus, the one who would eliminate all humans. Urus warned the protagonist to be careful, believing that this monster was responsible for the disappearance of all the in-game creatures. Then, he mentioned something about the protagonist's friend, confirming that her character had been deleted. As the monster lunged at him, the protagonist simply raised a wooden stick in its direction and managed to block the attack, sending it flying. Hawkeye finally found the monster and sprinted toward it. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued pummeling it with his wooden stick, dealing irreversible damage. As the fight came into view, the livestream viewers realized that a battle was already taking place. Upon seeing the protagonist, Hawkeye instantly remembered that day. He drew his bow, ready to take his revenge. But this time, the monster had already fallen. As the monster took more hits, its stats kept dropping. Its level, once an overwhelming 999, had now fallen to 723. The protagonist asked what was happening to the monster. Just moments ago, it had been flying all over the map, dodging his attacks effortlessly, but now it was getting slower. Urus explained that the energy it had stolen was returning to its rightful owners, and revealed the creature's ability. It could steal energy by killing a player and absorbing their power. Realizing that defeating the monster would bring his friend back, the protagonist became even more determined. The creature, enraged, lunged at him once again. In response, the protagonist activated another skill, 1 million strikes, and unleashed it upon the monster. Its level kept dropping rapidly, and the viewers of the live stream began cheering for the protagonist, saying that thanks to him, they could finally play again. Among those watching was an idol, glued to her phone the entire time. Seeing the protagonist fight like that, she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Uraken's level plummeted to 180. He was practically finished. The protagonist suggested ending things right there. But in a final act of desperation, the monster lashed out with its tentacle, slicing him in half and absorbing all of his stats. The protagonist's absorbed cells reformed, allowing him to reclaim all of his stolen life energy. Not only that, but he also drained the monster's remaining power, unlocking its secret ability, Voracity, which granted him the power to absorb energy and stats from enemies. The goddess of life had been watching the battle the entire time. She sighed, saying that this wasn't the path she had expected him to take, but at least it had been an interesting fight. The protagonist scoffed, pointing out that she seemed awfully happy to see her own son die, then insulted her by calling her a cockroach. She casually brushed it off, claiming that her speech had just been a scripted act. Then, she asked if he seriously thought she would ever give birth to something like that. Raising her staff, she smirked and told him it was a secret. Then, she swung it, opening a dimensional rift. From within, a grotesque creature emerged. She waved goodbye and stepped through the portal, disappearing. With all the players finally back in their bodies, they celebrated their return to the game. The protagonist was welcomed into the village, hailed as their brave warrior. He took the chance to show off a little, boasting that he hadn't expected these people to finally recognize just how powerful he was. The livestream had hit 234,852 viewers, becoming one of the biggest viral moments in gaming communities, and even trending on YouTube. But then, an unknown player spoke up, questioning if everyone had already forgotten how insane the protagonist was. How could they hail him as a hero after he had killed millions of players? Hawk stepped in, shutting him down. He then turned to the protagonist, saying it was an honor to meet him, and asked if they hadn't crossed paths before. Without wasting time, Hawk made an offer. "Want to join my guild?" At that moment, everyone present suddenly realized the protagonist wasn't part of a group. Instantly, everyone started calling out to him, bombarding him with invitations. As he ran, He suddenly slammed his head into something that wasn't there before. He staggered back, looking up, only to find a massive golden statue of himself, perfectly sculpted. Both he and Urus stared in shock. Then, someone spoke up. "So, do you like the surprise?" Turning around, he found himself face to face with that old guild of billionaires, except now, they were all dressed just like him. Mr. Wang, the guild master, congratulated him on his achievement, claiming that he had known who he was all along. Ever since their first meeting, he had been so inspired by the protagonist that he had a statue built in his honor. The protagonist was shocked to see that the statue had been created from scratch in such a short time, and asked where all their expensive items had gone. The idol sat in her room, deep in thought. She told herself that she knew, she had always known, something was off about this whole situation. Too many strange things had happened in such a short time. The time when the monsters they hid vanished in the blink of an eye, the time he defeated a rabbit monster with a single strike, and even when the Hallis and guild members stole her gloves, only for them to reappear out of nowhere. She questioned why he did that, why he pretended to be weak in front of her, why he had lied to her. Memories of past traumas flooded her mind. She could never forgive people who lied to her. Things in the village had finally calmed down. The protagonist could finally breathe without people crowding around him, and he wondered if this was what being a celebrity felt like. That was when his friend appeared before him. He told her he knew he had forgotten something, and had noticed she wasn't around earlier. He then said he had something for her, and took the scarf from his cloak, wrapping it around her neck. She gave him a strange look, and then asked why he was lying to her so much. The protagonist tried to play dumb, claiming he had never lied. She then asked if he was the guy who had moved into the apartment next door. That was when he realized who she was. When he asked her, she replied that she was Sarung Han. Her manager was furious that she had revealed her identity, and asked if she had any idea what kind of trouble she could have gotten herself into. Her name was trending on the internet at that very moment. She then added that she had also seen her customize her in-game character to look exactly like herself, and asked if there was something wrong with the little pair inside her head, brain. She went on to say that she could have at least changed her hairstyle, and admitted that she was surprised people hadn't figured it out sooner. The idol defended herself, saying she didn't care if people found out who she was. She had never tried to hide it in the first place. She then questioned her manager, asking what was so wrong about playing games, and why she had to hide her identity. She confessed that she played for fun and didn't see why she should care what other people thought about it. The manager responded that she was only worried about fans discovering that her extremely sweet personality in interviews wasn't real. The idol defended herself, saying she never wanted to act that way. It was her manager who had forced her to. She had never wanted to lie to her fans. And with that, she locked herself in her room. As she logged back into the game, a childhood memory surfaced in her mind. She had been performing a song for her classmates. From a young age, she had shown great talent in music. By the time she was 5, she had already entered the industry. She was known as a prodigy, with people claiming her voice was like that of an angel. They said she was born to sing. However, she had abusive parents who only cared about money. She was constantly exploited by them, attending every kind of festival, interview, and even filming commercials as a child. Such a schedule would have been overwhelming even for an adult. They always forced her to push past her limits, despite still being a child. That was when her health problems began to manifest due to the abuse. When she collapsed during a performance, she called out for her parents, but they, feeling embarrassed by the situation, abandoned her there. Inside the game, she was recalling the moment the protagonist had given her the scarf. Then, she was caught off guard by the sound of his voice, saying that he had finally found her. The protagonist said he knew she would be there, and asked why she had run away like that. She told him to leave. He whispered to Urus, asking what was wrong with her. Urus replied that he thought she was mad at him, but wasn't sure why. The little monster then commented that he clearly knew nothing about women, explaining that she was angry because he had lied to her and hidden his powers. The protagonist then asked what he should do. Urus simply told him to apologize. The protagonist looked embarrassed but eventually apologized, admitting that he hadn't intended to lie to her at first, but things had somehow ended up that way. He had wanted to tell her eventually, but could never find the right moment. She then asked if he really thought an apology would be enough, claiming that he didn't even understand the meaning of the word. As he tried to explain himself, he was interrupted when a mysterious monster suddenly kidnapped her. A mysterious figure was riding atop the monster. He asked if he had grabbed her too tightly, saying that he hadn't meant to hurt her like that. Urus recognized him. The protagonist demanded to know who he was and told him to come down. The man apologized to the brave warrior, claiming that someone wanted to meet her and that he was simply taking her to that person. Urus tried to warn the protagonist not to use his strongest attack on him, but it was too late. He had already swung his stick. The man activated a skill called 8 Mirrors, reflecting the attack back at the protagonist. He lost an arm from the counterattack, but his regeneration ability immediately restored it. Urus then revealed that he knew this man. It was Habak. He added that they were of the same kind. The protagonist jokingly asked if that meant he was also a weakling. A talisman Habak carried developed a crack. He was surprised and realized that the protagonist was truly powerful. He was the first to break it after that person had done so before. Even so, he remarked that the protagonist was still just a human and had no right to possess a fragment of a god. With that, he left with her. When she woke up, she was inside an unfamiliar cell. She panicked at the situation and backed away from him, asking who he was and where she was. As she caught sight of them, she immediately recognized them. It was her parents. After the day she had collapsed during her performance, she took a break from her singing career. However, there were two people who didn't take this well. Her parents refused to accept that she would give up singing and would beat her to force her to return, always claiming they did it because they loved her. Many years passed, and her fame faded away. This caused her parents to cross the line, placing a price on her body for a group of men. Thankfully, she managed to escape from the place where she was held captive and went straight to the police to report them. The court issued a restraining order preventing her parents from coming near her. They tried to appeal, but were unsuccessful. Thanks to the protection of the law, she was finally free from them, but she was still shattered inside, deeply traumatized. She carried many traumas, especially one related to lies. After everything, she refused to leave her room. During this time, she found refuge in online games. After spending all her time in a dark room, her eyesight deteriorated, and she started wearing glasses. Because of her painful past, even to this day, she feels anxious when taking off her glasses. The reason she finally returned to the real world happened shortly after her current manager found her in the game. Seeing her parents in front of her made her tremble, and she quickly reminded them that they had a restraining order against them. He defended himself, saying they were in a game now, and had come there after seeing her play. They couldn't find her on their own, and it was thanks to the man who brought them there. He then left, saying he would leave them alone, disconnecting from the game. The first person to speak was her mother, who said that she had grown a lot and that the only way she could see her was on television. She expressed gratitude for finally being able to see her through a virtual reality world. She questioned how they could separate a child from her parents in such a cruel way. The idol then asked what they wanted from her, stating that if they didn't have a good reason, she would leave immediately. Her mother then apologized. She confessed that she had wanted to apologize all this time, admitting they had been too harsh with her. She asked if she could find it in her heart to forgive them, claiming that she just wanted to have a happy family again. Habak was outside when he saw the protagonist approaching. He commented that this place was unknown to others, and assumed it was probably Urus who had guided him there. The protagonist interrupted, saying he was back for round 2 and confessed that he was the kind of person who needed to return the same pain his enemy had caused him. Then, he initiated a fight. The creature multiplied into 2, and then into dozens. This ability was called Mirror Clones. All the creatures charged at the protagonist, who used his stick to defend himself, vaporizing one of them. That was when Urus warned him to be careful of this special mirror ability. There were a total of 8 variations, each with a different effect. He revealed that the creature was not a player, but a boss that required a specific strategy to be defeated. While they were talking, one of the monsters attacked him from behind, and soon all of them joined in, shooting fireballs at him. The protagonist, irritated by the scare he just had, decided to use his ability called 1 million hits, defeating all the clones. However, no matter how many he killed, the mirror's power continued to produce more clones. He then resolved to try breaking the mirror itself, launching an immense amount of attacks incessantly, causing the mirror to crack again. As he noticed that his enemy had let his guard down, He charged at him, taunting him as weak. The enemy defended himself, claiming he wasn't weak but that the protagonist was incredibly powerful. The protagonist demanded that he answer if he didn't want to die and asked why he had kidnapped his friend, as well as what the fragment of God he had previously mentioned was. The enemy hesitated, unsure if he should respond. The protagonist told him he should be dead for taking such a beating. The enemy replied that his mirror was nearly broken, but it seemed he could still use it one last time. He then created a clone of the protagonist. The protagonist was shocked to see an exact copy of himself. This was an ability called Mirror of Clones, which created an exact replica of the target with a mirrored appearance. The copy then launched an attack at the protagonist with its stick, hitting him directly and depleting his health bar completely, indicating he had been defeated. Upon seeing the attack's result, Havoc admitted he should have made clones of himself instead of the monster before. Urus then asked what his objective was there. Havoc apologized for not having much time to greet him, and remarked that he looked much cuter than before. Urus interrupted him, insisting he answer the question and also asking why he had suddenly decided to show himself, questioning if it was an order from them. Havoc replied, asking if he could at least pinch Urus's cheeks once. Their conversation was interrupted by a mass that suddenly appeared on the ground. This mass of flesh was the protagonist's body regenerating. Due to his ability, his adversary was shocked to see his grotesque regenerative form. His clone, upon seeing him, launched another attack, which the protagonist parried with his stick, causing a massive explosion. Since neither of them was hurt, they charged at each other, and the battle grew intense, full of destruction and explosions. The attacks seemed infinite, yet they fought tirelessly. No matter how many blows were exchanged, the other always had one more. Finally, after many powers were used against one another, they were both destroyed, activating their regeneration abilities and bringing them back to normal. They then started the duel again, launching themselves toward each other. Urus continued to insist that Havoc answer his question, again asking why he had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and why he had kidnapped the girl. Havoc finally replied that he would be completely lost about that, and suggested Urus pay more attention to the people around him for once. He claimed that none of them could defeat him, as he was the strongest monster in the entire game, the Great Urus. He then posed a question to Urus, reminding him that previously he hadn't cared about any humans in that world. He questioned how and why he had suddenly become attached to a mere human, asking for the reason behind the question and stating that he could guess just by looking at what was happening around them. He goes on to say that he believed there were still some misunderstandings between them, but there was no need to worry about it, at least not yet, as he wasn't interested in the warrior who had become his friend. His only goal there was the fragment of God. Urus asked if he was referring to love. Havoc began to laugh at this response, questioning what he meant, and if he really thought she was the fragment of God, wondering if he genuinely believed an ordinary human like her could be that valuable. He then confessed that she was actually just the person who possessed the fragment. It was revealed that her gloves were the fragment, likely the reason her parents were after her. Urus questioned if those expensive gloves she carried were the fragment, to which Havoc replied that the price didn't matter. For most regular players, the price indicated the item's value and functionality. However, in that game, items were divided into various classes. The lowest rank was called normal, improving with rare items, then unique items, and finally mythical items. Above these, there supposedly existed an ascending classification, but they had never seen one in their lives. The protagonist's fight against his clone continued, but this time he left an opening and was attacked by his opponent. Their stats and skill controls were exactly the same, making the battle very intense. It was a fight between a player and a robot, and in that game, a robot had an advantage. Upon realizing this, Urus ran toward the protagonist, asking if he was okay. His regeneration ability activated, allowing him to recover again. It was the first time he was having so much fun, shocking everyone with what he said. Until now, he had been very bored with battles against enemies that died in just one attack. He confessed he didn't want to kill that clone yet. He wanted to continue fighting him. Urus warned that he was now in danger, but the protagonist said he had already figured out 2 ways to defeat his copy, leaving everyone surprised. And that was the story for today. Did you enjoy it? Then leave a like, and let me know in the comments what stories you want to see next. I'm always keeping an eye on the comments and bringing the best stories, so don't forget to subscribe and share with friends who also love manhwas. See you in the next video.
It took a while, but we're back. and as we can see, that fight against the protagonist's clone was still raging on. The force of their blows was so immense that it made the entire planet tremble. People around them were utterly shocked by the sheer power on display. That blue-haired kidnapper then admitted he was now curious and wondered what strategy the protagonist would use to kill the monster he had created. Meanwhile, the goddess was casually eating her sandwiches, commenting that he had probably gotten some kind of buff. Habek is on a completely different level compared to most bosses in Chrono Life, and basically, this is the absurdly high power level of the 8 mirrors. She explains that he was designed to never be defeated alone, leaving the protagonist with only 2 possible ways to take him down. Not everyone gets the privilege of being humiliated in 2 different ways, huh? The protagonist then lays out his plan, his first method, destroying the entire planet. That statement alone was enough to make everyone a little nervous, but he continues, explaining that if he wipes out the planet and ends the whole game, just like last time, Captain Love will return to the village, making that cheap copy disappear. But he admits that he doesn't want to use an old strategy to win, so he's going with his second method instead. As he says this, the duo watching seemed oddly calm about his statements. However, the CEO watching everything was visibly on edge, praying that the protagonist wouldn't use his second method. Honestly, I'm afraid to even imagine what he thought it would be. Meanwhile, in that completely bizarre turn of events, the idol's mother was asking where she had put her silence gloves, demanding the truth and promising she wouldn't be mad. She then reveals that Habek had promised them a huge sum of money if they brought him those gloves. She tries to convince her daughter, saying she wasn't even asking her for real money anymore, so the least she could do was hand over the item. Then the psychological warfare begins, reminding her that she gave birth to her and asking if she couldn't at least do this one thing for them. The idol insists that she doesn't know where the gloves are, claiming they disappeared a long time ago. Her father then turns completely deranged, accusing her of hiding them. She starts crying, saying she really doesn't know, but before she can explain, he suddenly slaps her across the face. As he strikes her, he calls her ungrateful, saying that they tried to move on after she ran away and abandoned them, questioning if it was really that big of a deal to give her parents a little money. He throws everything in her face, how they gave birth to her, changed her diapers, fed her, and put her to sleep, while continuing to demand to know where their money is. I have no words to describe such a heavy moment. For a manhwa with comedy, this really caught me off guard. All the while, the protagonist was still fighting his clone amidst all this chaos. Iris then notices a strange light appearing during their exchange of blows and wonders what it could be, suspecting it to be a new ability from his master. However, he quickly realizes that the eerie purple light beneath him looks way too familiar. That's when the protagonist activates an ability, calling upon gluttony. And let me tell you, it was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. His tongue took on an absolutely bizarre, almost inconvenient shape. Iris apparently had the same reaction as me. Then, in an utterly surreal move, the protagonist used that unsettling tongue to touch the back of his clone's neck. And then, in a completely unexpected twist, the protagonist's clone ends up copying the ability and using it on him. The blue-haired guy explains once again that the opponent is essentially a perfect mirror reflection of the protagonist. Just like him, the clone could also use the gluttony ability along with his high-performance healing factor battery. He then tells the protagonist that he really should have gone with the first method instead because his strategy just failed miserably. That's when the protagonist equips his backup battery, leaving the blue-haired guy completely stunned. And now, with that weird tongue of his still in play, the scene was getting way too bizarre. We then see 2 of those great tongues coming out of the protagonist's mouth, one attached to the blue-haired guy and the other to his clone. Oh, and I totally forgot to mention, those cursed tongues, they're actually tentacles. The protagonist starts laughing, saying that he didn't care about his clone at all, only about the main body. The blue-haired guy was caught completely off guard by how easily the protagonist had managed to launch another tentacle. The protagonist's ability then takes effect, and the blue-haired guy is completely absorbed into him. At the same time, his clone instantly vanishes. The protagonist then explains that as soon as the main body is fatally wounded, the clone disappears immediately. He says he had a lot of fun and bids him farewell. However, the blue-haired guy manages to regain consciousness and cuts off the gray tentacle. This time, though, he looks incredibly weak and shaken. He starts muttering that the protagonist is seriously problematic and that he never expected him to have such underhanded tactics. Fortunately for him, he had no choice but to give up that divine piece, the silence glove. Then the dynamic duo starts talking, asking if he didn't know that the glove had already been absorbed by Yurekin. The goddess casually says she just didn't tell him. That's when the blue-haired guy starts floating and says he'll retreat for now. Meanwhile, the protagonist shoves that freaky thing back into his mouth and questions how the guy dares to leave just like that after losing. He demands to know who gave him permission to run away so easily and grabs his stick. The blue-beard guy admits the protagonist has a point, saying that a loser should flee like a lizard dropping its tail. That's when he tosses a mirror to the protagonist, politely asking him to accept it as a reward for completing a mission. He confesses that it's not an official reward, but he hopes the protagonist will spare him if he hands over something valuable. The protagonist raises his stick, asking why he should spare his life just because of this, arguing that he could get way more loot by killing him. The capitalist mindset has fully taken over the poor guy. The blue-haired guy acknowledges that he has a fair point but argues that he needs to stay alive for the mirror to function. Instead of killing him, keeping him alive would actually benefit the protagonist more. With that, he bids farewell and teleports away. Then a red notification screen pops up, informing the protagonist that the owner of the mirror has just been removed. The system congratulates him, declaring that he is now the new owner of Habak's mirror. The protagonist glances at the hill beside him, saying he doesn't really care about this since his real objective is Captain Love, not some mirror. Meanwhile, in that same hellhole, the girl continued to be slapped by her father, who kept up his verbal and physical abuse. He demanded to know if she understood how much they had suffered because of her, insisting that she should obey her parents without question and without speaking back. After that series of slaps, the poor girl collapses to the ground and her father suddenly realizes there might be another option. Instead of taking the silence glove, he declares that from now on, they'll just start stealing her money. Still on the floor, the idol slowly starts getting up, saying that she's tired of all this. Her mother follows up, explaining that since they were inside a game, nothing happening here was truly real, and the law had no restrictions in this world. She tells the idol that she can't run away from them anymore, and that their family will be together forever. Girl reject that offer and move on seriously. Traumatized beyond words, the idol just starts crying, calling out for someone to free her from this hell. That's when the protagonist appears, casually picking his nose and asking if they're stupid, pointing out that she only needs to stop playing the game to never see them again. Her mother immediately questions who he is and how he dares to interfere in their conversation. The idol notices his presence, and her father suddenly recognizes him from a video he had seen earlier. But before he can say anything dumb, the protagonist swings his secret stick ability, one that lets him hit people without killing them, and sends the father crashing to the ground. The protagonist casually admits that even when he's being rude, he at least shows some respect to elders. But scum like them, they're an exception to his rule. Eurus, overhearing this, is shocked, since the protagonist always speaks respectfully to older people. Meanwhile, the father starts complaining, yelling that they are her parents. Furious, the protagonist tells him to go screw himself, repeatedly questioning if they really are her parents. He asks what kind of world they think this is, where parents can beat their kids and steal their money. The mother tells him to ask Sarang herself, insisting that they are, in fact, her real parents. Honestly, I don't even think that question needs to be asked at this point. The protagonist confesses that he absolutely despises situations like this, where people drag reality into a game, and he asks why they're still playing at this point. Finally, addressing the idol directly, he asks why she's just sitting there with that dumb expression after getting beaten. Completely confident, he tells her not to back down, reminding her that her level is far higher than theirs. Now on her knees, she weakly tries to explain that they really are her parents. The protagonist scoffs, calling her pathetic and accusing her of being way too realistic inside a game. He goes on saying that just by watching this situation, he already understands what kind of family they are. But if she keeps playing like a loser, what's the point of her even staying in this game? He asks if she's just going to run away from the game, just like she does in real life. At that, she stands up, visibly irritated, demanding to know what he could possibly understand. Crying now, she yells that he has no idea what she's been through all this time. That's when her mother slaps her again. Her mother coldly states that she doesn't understand what her daughter means by all of this, claiming that she and her father have suffered the most. She insists that whether in reality or in the game, they are still her parents, her only parents. The protagonist suddenly starts laughing, mocking her for getting slapped so easily. He tells her that she's on her own now since she has a higher level than everyone else. Come on, girl, knock their teeth out already. And finally, the idol fights back. Even without weapons, just using her fists, her punches hurt like hell. Remembering all the abuse and suffering she endured at the hands of her parents, she throws a full-force punch at her mother's face, knocking out a tooth and sending her flying through the air. After that day, the idol found herself back in that interview. Now speaking openly, she admitted that it really was her inside the game and claimed that she had been having fun with Chrono Life all along. The host, clearly surprised, remarked that this was quite unexpected and commented on how realistic the game was. He then added that based on her personality, he couldn't imagine her even killing a rabbit. She immediately put on her idol persona, sweetly responding that, of course, She would never do such a thing, claiming that fighting monsters to the death was too stressful and far from her reality. Han Sarang had completely overcome her trauma and was now living comfortably. The anxiety that once plagued her had entirely disappeared, and she didn't even need to wear her glasses anymore. After hearing her talk about fighting and killing monsters, the host, looking a little awkward, pointed out that this seemed the complete opposite of her usual self. Sarang then confessed that there was a possibility that how she behaved inside the game was actually her true personality, leaving everyone charmed by her words. She then casually dismissed the thought, saying that in the end, it didn't really matter which version of her was the real one. After all, if people were searching for reality inside a game, they had no reason to keep playing. Honestly, she's got a point there. Meanwhile, the protagonist was watching the interview from his home. For some reason, after that completely honest and cool statement from Han Sarang, she gained far more fans than she had before. Everyone was supporting her, and the protagonist decided he would now support her as a fan too. Han Sarang, the idol who had overcome her past trauma and left the virtual world behind to live happily in reality. That said, the protagonist logged back into the game shortly after, only to run into her again. She greeted him warmly, teasing him about being late again, then immediately started smacking him, asking if being late had become a habit. "Back in school, I was just like this," she added, before asking if he really wanted to die. The protagonist, still rubbing his head, explained that he had just logged in after watching her interview and asked why she wasn't lit at that moment. With an angelic smile, the idol revealed that her interviews were always pre-recorded. As it turned out, despite overcoming her trauma, Han Sarang hadn't given up on the game. In fact, from what the protagonist had heard, her schedule had even been adjusted so she could play a little more. She then called out to him, saying they didn't have time to waste and ordering him to follow her. Confused, he asked where they were going. Irritated, she snapped at him, saying he was being really annoying and asked if he was going to question everything she said. She then reminded him that he seemed to have forgotten something. She still hadn't accepted his apology. "Well, we did mess up, my guy." Embarrassed, the protagonist admitted she was right. Sarang, secretly smiling, told him it was fine. She was going to make an exception and forgive him this time. But as compensation, he would have to carry her. Hearing this, the protagonist suddenly remembered the past, back when he had first met her. He used to constantly chase after her, begging to be carried, claiming he didn't know much about the game since he was a total newbie and that she was like his master. Snapping back to reality, the girl turned to him with a gentle expression and, stepping closer, politely asked him to carry her. And for some completely bizarre reason, the scene's visual quality shifted from looking like it was drawn on a napkin to full-blown realism. I swear I nearly had a heart attack thinking I had switched to a different story. 2 whole hours almost wasted. The world's #1 virtual reality game, Chrono Life. Within this game, there exist countless guilds of various types, formed due to the vast diversity of players and their different goals. Among them, the strongest stand out as the top 5 guilds. Each of these elite guilds has its own set of strengths and unique criteria that have earned them their prestigious reputations. However, one guild took a completely different path from the others. Its members possessed an unparalleled information network that outmatched every other guild in the world. Their web of operations could easily cover the entire continent. Every single one of them belonged to the thief class. This guild was known as Robin Hood, one of the top 5 guilds in the world, yet one that had gained an unusual reputation. Every single member of Robin Hood was completely wiped out in a single night. To this day, little is known about the tragedy. Yet, as we sift through the aftermath, we realize that one of them was still alive. However, as soon as he attempted to escape after witnessing the massacre of his guildmates, a mysterious man appeared behind him, sneering that he had finally found one of the rats who had survived. A fight broke out between the two. The mysterious figure remarked that the survivor was much stronger than the others, only to suddenly disappear via teleportation. The thief was taken aback. It had all happened in the blink of an eye. But in the next blink, he found himself impaled through the stomach by a massive sword. The man had teleported behind him for a perfectly executed strike. Even though the thief was stronger than his comrades, he was still far too weak. Desperate, he demanded to know who the masked man was and why he was doing this. The mysterious figure simply laughed. The answer was obvious. Then, slipping on a mask identical to the thief's own, he casually replied that he was doing it simply because he found it fun. And there it is, the moment we realize what an absolute lunatic this guy is. The next day, far from the site of the massacre, a traveler rode along in his wagon, pulled by a bizarrely oversized cat. Inside the wagon sat the protagonist and the idol. The traveler announced that they were nearing their final destination, the Rocky Mountain Dungeon. While listening, the protagonist continued munching on a drumstick. I could say it was a chicken drumstick, but given how weird this game is, it was probably some kind of crazy dinosaur meat instead. He commented that they had arrived sooner than expected. Even the idol agreed, checking her map and confirming that they were only about 5 minutes away. The strange wagon they were riding in was a well-known form of transportation in chrono life, a meow carriage. The demon cat, a creature native to the demon realm, had been trained and domesticated before eventually being introduced to the human world. Over time, it was trained further to pull these carriages. Surprisingly, the founder of this transportation service was just an ordinary player with a rather niche profession, monster tamer. The success and rapid expansion of meow carriages made them a standout business among smaller vendors. And finally, the dynamic duo arrived at their destination. The Rocky Mountain dungeon was far higher up than they had expected. It was an enormous stone dungeon, towering approximately 1,205 meters above sea level. Most of the monsters in this area are quite numerous, averaging around 30 in power and exist in large populations. This makes it one of the most popular hunting grounds for beginner players eager to level up quickly. At least that's what the protagonist had heard before. He had never actually been there himself. After all, the highest level he had ever reached playing solo was only 7. But anyway, that was a pretty long introduction. The main reason they were here was to carry Captain Amor. How considerate of him, huh? I'm already starting to ship these two troublemakers. During their last conversation, she had been much more serious than he had expected, and now somehow they had ended up in this situation together. However, he still wasn't sure how to proceed in this part of the game since he had never been here before. At this moment, the protagonist was wondering just how far he should carry her. After all, grinding levels for someone else could get really tedious. To make things easier, it would be best to go straight to the Eurus nest so she could reach the max level as quickly as possible. As she began fixing her hair, the protagonist suddenly remembered something he had prepared for her. Calling for her attention, he told her that he had a present. Surprised, she asked why she was getting a gift so suddenly. That's when the protagonist pulled out a transcendent tier item. Transcendent gloves, a weapon far superior to whatever she was currently using. He explained that the last time he had returned her scarf, he had forgotten about the gloves, and since he already had his own pair, probably referring to his own fists, he decided to gift them to her. The idol, holding the gloves in her hands, was moved to tears. She thanked him, saying this was the first time in her life that she had ever received a present. Hearing this, the protagonist was taken aback. "Are you serious?" he asked, surprised. Given that she was a well-known idol, shouldn't she be receiving gifts from her fans all the time? She then asked, "Are my precious fans the same as you?" That was when he finally understood what she meant. "No way," he replied. "There's no way your fans are the same as me." She smiled, thanking him again and promising to use them to the best of her ability today. Then, calling him by his infamous nickname, Panties, she finally asked for his character name. After all this time, she's only asking now, El Mao. The protagonist was momentarily shocked, realizing that he had never actually mentioned his character's name. She confirmed that she had heard it once before, back when they first partied up, but she couldn't remember it. Just as he was about to say it, the meow carriage suddenly came to an abrupt stop. For some reason, the demon cat pulling them had a sudden outburst. The runaway driver turned to the protagonist and the idol, asking if they were okay, explaining that the cat had suddenly stopped without warning. Inside the carriage, we were met with a rather interesting sight. Due to the sudden stop, the idol had accidentally landed her hand somewhere, inappropriate on the protagonist. Urus apparently had the same reaction I did watching this unfold. After that, they quickly pulled away from each other, only for the cat to enter another frenzy. The runaway driver, frustrated, demanded to know what was wrong with it, only to suddenly be faced with a survivor from that recently annihilated guild. The wounded thief, with a gaping hole in his stomach, politely asked if they could help him. Moments later, he was inside the carriage, explaining what had led him to this state. He claimed that the one who did this was a man he had never seen before, someone whose level he still couldn't even begin to comprehend. Even his class was a mystery. The only thing known about him was his character's name. But one thing was certain. This guy was no ordinary player. He seemed capable of copying items. Right before his eyes, he manifested a carbon copy of his mask. Then he revealed his character's name, Booty Boy. The girl tried to recall if she had ever heard such a name before, while Eurus immediately conjured up a rather unpleasant mental image. The protagonist then asked for permission to pose a question. The survivor nodded, saying he could ask as many questions as he wanted. So the protagonist asked, "Who are you?" At that moment, both the idol and Eurus were shocked that he didn't recognize the man before them. Poor guy really knows nothing, my god. And so the survivor introduced himself, Hong, a member of one of the top 5 guilds in the world. The protagonist was taken aback that the idol actually knew this person. She explained that even children knew who he was. Eurus then asked if he had forgotten. This man standing before them was the one who had once annihilated 3 million players in a single event. The protagonist shrugged, saying he didn't care anymore. To him, this had nothing to do with him. Some random jerk had just attacked this guy's guild. Why should he be the one to help him? At that moment, Han began removing his mask. Apologizing, he admitted that he was the one here asking for help, yet he hadn't even introduced himself properly. The protagonist sighed, calling him stubborn and stating that he had no reason to help him. But then the big reveal. Han wasn't just anyone. Han was a woman, a rather beautiful one at that. And not only that, she was also the guild master of Robin Hood. The protagonist instantly switched to charmer mode. Who needs a reason to help someone? He said smoothly. Helping others is a necessity, a hobby, and my specialty. The idol, watching this unfold, was shocked at the protagonist's shamelessness. Han put her mask back on, thanking him for understanding the situation. She assured him that he definitely wouldn't regret this decision because, whether he liked it or not, this problem was connected to him as well. And there it was, the ultimate argument. Meanwhile, far away within the Chrono-like support team's server infrastructure, the staff realized it was already quite late to still be working. One of the team members suggested that everyone start packing up to go home. However, another employee grumbled, jealous that only their team leader was actually allowed to leave. A female colleague responded, telling him that he and the leader both had to stay behind and work overtime. The team leader raised an eyebrow. And who gave you permission to work past hours? Then he ordered them to drop their work and head home, saying that he would handle things in their place. At last, the team leader was revealed, Seo Sungwon. The female employee hesitated. Are you serious? You already worked overtime yesterday. The other guy smirked, throwing in a little jab. What, still haven't made up with your wife? I would have fired him on the spot, to be honest. After everyone finally left the office, the team leader revealed his true colors. Scoffing, he muttered that all his employees ever wanted these days was to waste time playing that stupid game. As he spoke, he pulled open a drawer, revealing a device that connected him directly to Chrono Life. Mocking the ridiculousness of his employee's situation, he slipped the VR headset onto his head. Now that those annoying idiots were gone, it was his turn to start making some money. And then he finally gained access to a crucial piece of information about this character inside the game. As soon as the necessary scanning process to enter the virtual world is complete, the truth becomes clear. He is none other than Booty Boy, the same psychotic player who completely annihilated an entire guild composed solely of thieves. But he wasn't exactly righteous, far from it. He abused his admin settings, using the system's advantages to stay far above the average player. As proof, he suddenly summoned a ridiculously overpowered sword out of thin air. Its name? Executor's Sword, plus 99, a unique rank weapon. Once wielded by the King of War, only one of these swords exists in the entire virtual world. And its destructive power, absolutely absurd. Our dear psychopath and admin abuser smirked, declaring that it was time to put in some overtime. Then his level was revealed. He had an operator class ranking similar to the protagonist. But here's the kicker. All of his stats were maxed out at 99,999 in every category. Very balanced, as we can clearly see. Are you enjoying the story so far? Don't forget to smash that like button and leave a comment. And make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next insane chapters. Level 999 was also known as Master Level. Not even professional players had reached such an absurd height. At the pinnacle of Chrono Life, reaching Master Level granted access to the rarest items, the legendary Transcendent category. This information had only been leaked once, yet it instantly became a hot topic among players. Still, not a single person had actually seen one of these items firsthand. To most, they seemed like artifacts straight out of a fantasy universe. The idol was still in disbelief over the gift she had received. She turned to the protagonist, clutching the item in her hands, moments away from equipping the gloves. Her voice shook with excitement. Wait, is this really a Transcendent tier weapon? The sheer pressure probably made her lightheaded. The protagonist nodded, confirming it. He told her to feel free to use them. After all, he had plenty of these Transcendent weapons. She was stunned by that last part. Finally, as she equipped the gloves, a system notification appeared, warning her. You are about to equip a Transcendent tier weapon. And just like that, the gloves became permanently bound to her. A massive pillar of light shot up to the heavens as soon as she put them on. And in that moment, the system congratulated her. Congratulations, you have become the rightful owner of the Transcendent gloves. Then in an instant, their glamorous form faded away. What was once a set of radiant, intricate gauntlets had shrunk down into a far simpler and more minimalistic design. The idol blinked, confused. What just happened? She asked the protagonist, baffled by the sudden downgrade. Then a system message appeared. Due to insufficient qualifications, the power level of this equipment has been significantly reduced. The higher your level, the stronger the weapon will become. The idol frowned, visibly frustrated. So, I don't have a high enough level to wield a transcendent weapon properly. She grumbled, complaining that even E-rank equipment should be better than this. Then, as if to test it, she casually placed her gloved hand onto the stone she had been sitting on. In the moment, it made contact. A surge of energy exploded outward. A shockwave rippled through the entire area. The sheer force of the impact caused the ground to quake, shaking everything nearby. Even the protagonist was knocked off his feet by the immense power. And this was with the weakened version of the weapon. Yeah, this thing is busted beyond belief. Upon witnessing this, Urus scoffed, remarking that these shockwaves were actually pretty weak. In his eyes, there was nothing particularly special about this so-called transcendent category. The protagonist agreed. Seizing the opportunity, Urus turned to him and asked what he planned to do next. Are you going to accept Hong's request? The protagonist stood up, stretching. I think I have to, he admitted. Hong said this case is connected to me somehow. Then we see the conversation that led to this decision. The protagonist, frowning, asked why he was connected to something like this. I've never even met that weird guy before, he pointed out. Hong tilted her head. And what do you think Booty Boy's goal is? The protagonist shrugged. He said he does it because it's fun. Hong sighed. Yeah, that's obviously a lie. She then revealed the real reason behind his actions: money. Booty Boy was duplicating items and selling them for real-world cash. According to the information gathered within the guild, Hong had also heard rumors that the protagonist was involved in this kind of business. The protagonist nodded. She continued, questioning whether he had recently sold a large number of items from Urus's nest on the market. Because of that, there had been a huge problem, a crash in high-quality equipment prices and a spike in inflation. That said, she added, what you did was never illegal. But Booty Boy's actions were. He was outright abusing his administrative privileges. Then, at the peak of his intelligence, the protagonist tilted his head and asked, Wait, what's this decline in equipment value you're talking about? Hong blinked. Realizing the sheer genius of this question, she awkwardly scratched her cheek and told him to forget it. It's not that important, she muttered. Here comes the scolding. She then explained exactly how he was connected to Booty Boy. If they allowed this guy to keep running wild, the entire game economy would collapse. And if that happened, criminal life itself might be doomed. The protagonist, rubbing his nose, asked if she was serious. But even then, he didn't quite see the problem. Can't you just report him to the Central, he asked. If you do that, his account will get banned and we'll have a happy ending. Then, with a smug grin, he chuckled. Wow, I'm actually a genius for thinking of that. Hong burst out laughing, but not because he was a genius. You're even dumber than I expected, she said. She then explained that the user Central wouldn't handle it so quickly. If he reported Booty Boy, the best he could expect was a generic automated response. Frustrated, she stood up. She had thought the protagonist was the only one capable of stopping that guy. After all, he was the one who single-handedly wiped out the Global Guild Alliance. Before leaving the carriage, she turned back to him. I'm counting on you, she said. Find Booty Boy and take him down before this game completely falls apart. Back in the present, the protagonist finally got up from the impact of the glove's power. He turned to Urus. Yeah, this is a huge pain, he muttered, but I don't have a choice. If they let that weirdo roam free, it would seriously mess up the real-world item market. The idol looked at him. Do you have any idea how to find him? She asked. We can't just wander around aimlessly looking for this guy. Then the protagonist revealed his plan. A brilliant plan, of course. Since we can't report him to the Central, there's only one thing we can do. The idol listened intently. It's a very simple solution, he said, but also a pretty cruel one. She gulped. All we have to do is blackmail the higher-ups. The idol's eyes widened. She had not expected that level of thinking. Meanwhile, in the real world, the protagonist dialed a number. He called the president. In a casual tone, he ordered him to meet at a certain location. If you don't show up, the protagonist smirked. I'll destroy your precious server again. The president, when answering the call, tries to understand what the protagonist meant by that, but the protagonist hangs up on him and starts laughing alone in his apartment. After hanging up the call, he also turns off the phone as a bonus. Now we see the president absolutely furious as he tries to call the protagonist back only to reach his voicemail. The protagonist starts jumping inside his apartment, saying he doesn't care about the malfunctioning central system, as he only needs to meet the president to resolve this quickly. As he leaves his apartment, saying he should ask for a double serving of soup, he runs into our dear idol. She tells the protagonist that she wants to go with him. The protagonist asks if it would be okay, since if anyone recognized her, it wouldn't end well. The idol replies that she doesn't care about that, and besides, it was already nighttime, so people wouldn't recognize her. The idol then tells the protagonist to call her Han Sarang in real life, and for some reason, he gets a bit shy. Then we see the idol's agent receiving a message from Sarang saying she would be out with the underwear for a while. By the adjective she used while leaving the bath, it seems like she wasn't very happy about it. Not even gonna mention the vulgarity here. Inside the soup shop, the president storms in looking for the protagonist, asking how dare he call him like that. He ends up spotting the protagonist, sitting with the idol having soup together. However, the president is so angry that he ignores her and starts choking the protagonist just like in a classic Yellow Do scene. After choking the protagonist, he asks who this girl sitting next to him is. He then asks if she's his girlfriend. The idol, apparently happy to be called that, smiles. The protagonist asks if he's crazy, saying that this girl is the top idol Han Sarang, and if he says anything like that, they'll be cursed by all her fans. Upon hearing the word curse, the president questions how dare he speak like that to an older person. That's when the idol gets upset, slams her hand on the table, and tells them to stop talking nonsense and get straight to the point. The protagonist and the president had some interesting reactions when she did this, and then they started explaining the situation in detail to the president. Based on his reaction after hearing this, it was clear that he wasn't pleased about someone having the unknown ability to copy items easily, but he continues saying that he believed what they were trying to say was something important. He questions if they thought that his virtual reality technology service was just some joke, claiming that the government's approval to legalize money transactions was basically pointless, and because of this, it wasn't like this unknown guy was some fantasy hacker breaking national security on his own like in the old days. The protagonist calls him frustrating, saying that someone really saw an item being copied. The president responds that Hong probably saw it wrong, arguing that it was basically impossible with a 0.1% chance of happening. In other words, they're screwed. The protagonist starts arguing with him, saying it was probably some kind of bug, but before things get worse, the idol asks for permission to speak, saying that if an external hack is impossible, then what about the possibility of using some sort of internal hack? Upon hearing this, the president becomes surprised, but then says that was also impossible, stating that even using internal operator accounts, they hadn't added any ability to copy items like that, as it's basically useless. He then starts to leave, saying he was very busy and had more things to do, reminding the protagonist not to forget to pay the bill. And before leaving, he tells both of them to enjoy the meeting. Apparently, only the poor idol was happy to hear this, while the protagonist internally questioned whether that old man was truly determined to kill him. A little later that same night, the president gathered some of his men, telling them to prepare 5 more, men who keep secrets, basically assembled the NIB team. Back in the game, the protagonist was once again by her side, commenting on that infamous booby boy, stating that if he finds him, he will crush his head. The idol laughs, saying that he's quite a masculine panty. At that moment, she takes the opportunity to ask what the true objective of Booty Boy might be. The protagonist is caught off guard and asks why such a sudden question. She explains that it seems strange to her because, as much as she thought about it, if it was for money, there would be no reason to attack the Robin Hood Guild. The protagonist responds, saying that he wasn't sure and questions whether the members of Robin Hood didn't have a lot of expensive items. She explains that this was exactly the reason she was finding everything so strange, because if he could copy items, he could simply copy them and sell them. So why did he keep doing this to normal players? And even more, why target the Robin Hood Guild, which had the best information in that regard? The protagonist at this point admits that he didn't know. The idol sighs, saying she wasn't surprised he didn't know anything, and he laughs, saying that he's not the intellectual type. As they were talking, a massive explosion happens near them. The idol jumps in fright, and as she gets up, asks what was happening. The two of them soon encounter an impact so strong that it seemed like the protagonist's power. Without hesitation, he runs toward the explosion to see what happened. At the sight of the explosion, Habek was on his knees, completely battered, and had even lost his left arm in a rather unpleasant manner. In front of him was Booty Boy, saying that he was nothing compared to the rumors he had heard. That really crushed his reputation. Habek finally starts speaking, asking why he was doing all of this, and stating that as the coordinator of this world, he was sure that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated. He asked if Booby Boy really thought he could handle the consequences, claiming that if he was caught by his superior, he wouldn't be safe. At that moment, Booty Boy grabs his neck, calling him arrogant, and starts asking how a mere fragment of files like him dared to question him. He then explains that if he keeps killing unique bosses like him, he won't be able to regenerate and his files will be permanently deleted. If he doesn't want to be deleted, it's better for him to answer correctly. He then asks where his master is. Habak resists, stating that he would never tell him. Booty Boy decides to kill him and raises his sword. However, before he could do anything, a voice suddenly orders him to stop. Booty Boy smiles upon hearing that, saying that he was already going to look for her, but in the end, she found him first. And then once again, we see the famous goddess of life, Luna. Booty Boy tells Luna to stay right there, saying that he'll finish off this guy first and then go to her. Luna, at this point, starts mocking him, saying he's quite insignificant, as even though he entered that game using an operator account, he was still more pathetic than a normal player. Upon hearing this, he clearly isn't happy, and she calls him trash to seal the deal. At that moment, he throws Habak to the ground, saying that there's no need to waste any more time with him and asserts that she will be next soon. Then he walks toward her, asking where Habak's master is. He, as the good old psychopath he is, says that she didn't need to answer that directly, claiming that it was fine, as they could take things slow. After he cut off all the rest of her limbs, he would plant them in the tree and use the fire from his magical staff to continue healing her, so she wouldn't die. He finishes by saying that they could take as long as they wanted with this little game since he would be working overtime that day. Life as a CLT employee is not easy, I get you, buddy. For some reason, she remembers the protagonist at that moment, stating that he seemed quite similar to Booty Boy, but apparently he was the complete opposite. Booty Boy doesn't understand what she means by that and asks what she's talking about. But before he could ask another rude question, he's crushed in front of her by a huge creature that appeared from a portal she invoked. Luna finally answers his question, saying that it meant he was disgusting and begins to leave. However, apparently he was still alive and says he forgot about that. Now he was standing behind her, asking if she was the owner of the thing that tried to kill him and if that was why she was so confident, since that thing would be enough to cause trouble for him. Luna looks back, asking if he was still alive. At that moment, we get a rather broad view of the creature itself, which, to be honest, was a pretty unpleasant sight. Luna, seemingly irritated, says that she's going to kill him for real this time, as trash like him doesn't deserve to live. It was at that moment that he invoked a type of domain expansion. That reference wasn't that great, but okay. The place he invoked was called GM Zone. It's basically a special area that can be created with the privilege of an operator account inside a game and is usually used for special purposes, like some sort of test within the game. However, as we can see, it wasn't being used entirely within that logic. Something was definitely off here, as we can see. Booty Boy, at this moment, questions Luna about what she previously said that he didn't deserve to live, claiming that it was pretty cringe. My God, such an old word. At that point, he tells her to stop being so immersed in games, and just when things were about to get interesting, we are taken back to the protagonist. At that moment, the protagonist was running quite fast along with the idol towards the explosion. Apparently, they both already knew that the explosion had been caused by Booty Boy. The protagonist now realized that it was probably some kind of insider abusing the system, since the president had previously said it was impossible this time, but his face told a completely different story. She had also heard that this so-called Booty Boy had completely crushed the Robin Hood Guild all by himself. After making this analogy, she concluded that she was sure he had some kind of super account and was working on it right now. Gedidal asks why he couldn't run faster than that, and the protagonist apologizes, saying he didn't put any points into agility. Now we see that his level points were nothing compared to Booty Boy's, as the highest he had was only 14,990, and by ironic fate, he only had 5 points in agility. A pretty balanced distribution, as we can see. As soon as they arrived, they encountered the GM zone on a much larger scale. Habak was beside them, explaining that this area they were seeing was basically like a teleport trace of his. He then greets the protagonist, calling him Mr. Hero. The protagonist at this moment is surprised to see him there and asks what he was doing there. Upon noticing that he was missing an arm, he also questions what happened. Habak takes the opportunity to tell the protagonist that for his information, Eurus was also a unique boss. The protagonist, in the peak of his intelligence once again, asks if this is true. Eurus confirms what he said, explaining that this was basically why he desperately begged the protagonist to save him. Habak adds that besides them, Luna was also a unique boss. Upon hearing this, the protagonist was apparently quite shocked by the news, as that damned cockroach all this time was a unique boss. I was already thinking this girl was a bit too overpowered. While they were talking, chaos was breaking out inside that GM zone. The two of them were constantly fighting, with powerful blows being exchanged, yet it didn't seem to have much effect, as Luna was the goddess of life. Even the dialogues were starting to repeat. It was getting so tiring. Luna once again said that a mere human like him wouldn't be able to kill someone of the divine class. Booty Boy repeated this phrase in sync with her and started laughing at her, saying that she was quite childish and asking if she really thought she looked cooler when saying that. He started explaining that he had been working at this company for years and asked if she really thought he didn't know what her ability was. He had also seen her fight with the stick guy. So after a brief explanation, he identifies the secret special ability of the famous goddess of life called life creation. In theory, it wasn't that attacks didn't work on her. In fact, she simply recreated herself with this ability, which started reacting simultaneously during the death process. After saying this, he charges at her again and once more strikes her with his sword. This fight is pretty balanced. 1 minute he's hitting, the next minute she's hitting him back. Immediately, we can see that she really was using an ability called life creation, and there she was again, intact. Booty Boy starts laughing, saying that, as he expected, it was indeed a very OP ability and that this ability of hers was the one that had received the most objections during internal company meetings. He then asks if she was the one who created Uriken with this ability too, using fragments of his left head. Basically, that's why she called Uriken her son. At this moment, she responds by saying that he talks too much, and then cuts him in half with her staff, claiming that nothing could change since he couldn't kill her. Booty Boy, with half of his body, asks if she was finally starting to attack him directly. At that moment, her staff changed back to its initial form in the blink of an eye. Booty Boy, now in front of her, asks if she knew why he brought her into this space. Now we can see that her whole body looked like it did at the beginning of the game, during the time when she tricked the protagonist. Booty Boy, now facing her, says that she knew how to make a really cute expression, claiming that he thought she was just a bothersome jerk. Then he stabs her with his sword, saying that if he kills her, Habek's master will definitely come out to the outside world. And so he finally bids farewell to Luna, the goddess of life. And with that, it's over for you, little cockroach. Apparently, shortly after this, Booty Boy was back in the real world, enjoying the money he earned by exploiting the game system. Now he was celebrating, claiming that drinking after working overtime was truly the best thing ever. Another guy who was with him claims that he was working too much and asks if the final stage was really all that. He denies, saying that, in fact, all of this was because of Habek, who didn't call his master until the end of everything. The guy says that at least he managed to kill Luna and asks if that wasn't enough to provoke Habek's master's appearance. Something interesting here is that at this moment we see Booty Boy with his left eye completely messed up. Sorry for mentioning that, but it just looked hilarious at the time. Booty Boy now gets more serious and confesses that he wasn't able to kill her. The guy accompanying him is surprised, but Booty Boy says it doesn't matter since there are other ways to find Habek's master. The guy then takes the opportunity to ask something he's been really curious about from the start, and finally asks the same question we're all asking. Who the hell is Habek's master that he's been searching for? Booty Boy, upon hearing this, is quite surprised that he didn't know, considering he's been working alongside him all this time. The other employee then confesses that he's been quite devoted to following Booty Boy without question ever since college. Booty Boy apparently had a small ego boost after hearing that. What ego wouldn't grow after hearing something like that, right? Anyway, Booty Boy explains that to make it simpler, his master is one of the bosses, the one related to the main story of Chrono Life, the merchant above all, the ultimate lazy one. The employee, upon hearing this, questions whether this monster was really a merchant. Booty Boy claims that if a monster like that wants to become a merchant, he'll make it happen, since that's the kind of freedom that's very common in the Chrono Life universe. The employee begins to find that name familiar, saying he must have heard it before, and now that he was thinking about it. Uriken did some sort of fusion before being known as Gluttony. Booty Boy gets irritated with him for not knowing this properly, as this part is well known in Catholicism, with the 7 deadly sins. Basically, it's something that's frequently seen in movies, webtoons, and even games. They are pride, greed, envy, wrath, lust, gluttony, and sloth. After some high-level conversation, as we can see, he finally explains that, essentially, within this game, there is a representation of the 7 deadly sins. The employee, upon hearing this, is surprised, claiming that it's plagiarism and calling the game stupid. Booty Boy, realizing how dumb his partner is, comments that, in reality, the only stupid one there is him. But finally, he manages to understand the concept of the main story boss in Chrono Life. Urus was pride, Uriken was gluttony, and Riot, the merchant, represents sloth. Luna was the representation of lust, a very typical characteristic of her if we pay attention. The employee, upon hearing this, responds that it was expected, claiming that if such a broken character of hers were a normal player, the game balance would be completely ruined. Booty Boy starts to realize that he almost got it wrong and says that she was a boss, but not an NPC like the others. The employee ends up getting confused after hearing this and asks what he meant, claiming that he was talking about a normal player changing roles and turning into a boss. Booty Boy goes back to his explanation, saying that the freedom in Chrono Life is much bigger than the employee can imagine, as it's even possible for a normal boss to become a merchant. And similarly, it's possible for a normal player to turn into a boss. Back in the game, the protagonist is apparently not too happy after hearing something and ends up getting irritated with Habek. He asks if the cockroach was a player or an NPC. Habek feels a bit awkward and says that he's not sure, explaining that it's something he doesn't know much about. However, Booty Boy probably already knew since he was an operator. The protagonist, after hearing this, realizes that now he has one more reason to defeat him. The idol interrupts, saying that she still doesn't understand and asks why that guy is so eager to meet Riot the Sloth, as his main goal was just to make money by selling items. He only needed to send them to the sales houses, and on top of that, there was that attack on the Robin Hood Guild, which made everything even more confusing. I'm not even sure what this guy really wants anymore. Habak finally admits that personally he has some idea of why Booty Boy is doing all of this. He suggests that it might be because of the Divine Fragment. More specifically, it's probably one of the numbered items. Upon hearing about the Divine Fragment, the protagonist mentions that he feels like he's heard about it before. Eurus then explains that this was the last thing Habak said when he kidnapped Captain Amor earlier. The Divine Fragment is another term for a numbered item. The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Hong, who overheard that exact part of the numbered item. Hong starts talking to them, apologizing for disappearing so suddenly, explaining that she had been busy investigating on her own, and invites everyone to follow her, saying that she found Booty Boy's hideout. A little while after they followed her, they finally arrive at a house in the middle of nowhere. The idol, upon seeing it, asks if this is really Booty Boy's hideout, claiming it's much humbler than expected. Hong confirms that it is exactly where he's hiding, saying that she was able to see who the owner was through one of her abilities. Secret ability activate, Maria Fei. The protagonist then points out that she had said before that Booty Boy wasn't there. She confirms, saying there were no signs of him and that it's a shame she couldn't see inside the house, since no one could enter unless they were the owner. That's when the protagonist, with his perfectly legal decision-making methods, decides to destroy the entrance to let them in. Hong is quite surprised and asks how he managed to do that. The protagonist says he just had to hit it for it to happen. Now the group was eager to enter, and as the dust settled, they realized the house was filled with treasures. The idol was the first to speak up after seeing everything, questioning whether everything in front of them was really an item. She even suggested that maybe Booty Boy had managed to copy everything. Hong, however, denies that, claiming that none of the items had been copied. An interesting thing is that everything was a numbered item. Looking at the items from above, there was likely more than 5 billion accumulated just in items. Clearly, hearing something like this left everyone quite shocked. Hong then gets closer, saying she could also see many things that Booty Boy had stolen from her guild when he attacked. She believes he left everything there because he probably didn't have enough space in his inventory. As she expected after seeing all of this, his true goal was the numbered item. The protagonist asks why, wondering that's because these items are expensive, claiming that Booty Boy could have just visited Eurys's nest like he did before. Hong replies that if he had done that to earn money, the company would have noticed, just like they did with the protagonist. Poor guy didn't cooperate either, just a random guy in underwear with a stick stronger than any weapon in the game, but oh well, the story moves on. But these numbered items are a different case, since there's a buyer who can easily purchase them. The protagonist then concludes that she's referring to Habak's master, the top merchant, Riot. Habak agrees with everything they're saying, claiming that he was thinking the same thing a little while ago. Hong says that Booty Boy is much worse than she expected, but at least they've unraveled his plan. And on top of that, this merchant isn't a player, so there's no risk of information leaking. He also sold these items through a private channel, so the market economy isn't significantly affected, and as a result, there's not much risk of getting caught by the game company. If they take a screenshot of everything in front of them and report it to the Central, the company will likely take action, since the operator has accumulated all of these items in his personal space. Everything, there's evidence they need. Hong then takes off her mask, seemingly happy that they can solve this case with the evidence they've gathered. Just as she tries to praise everyone's performance, a protagonist activates his greedy mode and asks under what authority she thinks she's doing this. He sarcastically asks if she's acting like some drama detective or something, pointing out that she spent the whole day talking about this only for the climax of the entire discussion to be just reporting everything to Central. Hong, a bit embarrassed, confirms and asks what they should do instead. Man, this guy is annoying sometimes. He completely shut down the poor girl's entire explanation. As the protagonist casually picks his nose, he suggests that they should properly educate Booty Boy. Shortly after all of this, the protagonist, alongside the idol, finds Booty Boy in the center of the village. The idol seems quite surprised that things went exactly as planned and that he appeared right on schedule. Booty Boy, looking irritated, asks why the protagonist is wearing that mask and whether he's trying to disguise himself. Laughing, the protagonist removes the mask, saying he borrowed it from Hong and besides, he's way too famous. Everyone would recognize him anyway. A little further away, on top of a house rooftop, Hong is observing alongside some members of her guild, watching as the protagonist's plan unfolds successfully. The guild members ask if this was really a plan and why he called Booty Boy to the village center. Then we get a flashback to the earlier planning stage. Right after the protagonist made his comments inside the cabin, he started crafting his plan, saying they should take all the items first. When asked why, he explains that it's too tedious to go into detail, so he won't, but he put a lot of thought into it. He also asked to borrow Hong's mask. The moment he did, the idol hit him with a flying kick. "I told you this was jealousy. I'm not crazy. At least not yet." Meanwhile, Booty Boy had returned to his hideout and was furious upon discovering the complete destruction of the place. It was supposed to be a personal hideout that couldn't be destroyed by the system. As he entered, he realized all of his money and numbered items were gone. Then he noticed a piece of paper on the floor. Picking it up, he found a letter from the protagonist stating that if he wanted his items back, he should come to the center of the village at 7 p.m. At the bottom of the letter, there was also a caricature flipping him off. Unsurprisingly, Booty Boy was livid after going through all of that. Now, back in the village, he demands to know why the protagonist took his money and starts approaching him with his sword. The protagonist tells him to stop, warning him that it's in his best interest not to get any closer. Then he asks Captain Amor to hand him one of the items. The idol rummages through a bag and pulls out a unique dragonfire dagger. She then positions herself in front of an NPC merchant, declaring that if Booty Boy takes another step, she'll sell it instantly. Booty Boy panics and yells at her to stop, claiming that the item is worth over 200 million in currency, and if sold to an NPC, it wouldn't even fetch 300 gold. Desperate, he demands to know what the protagonist's goal is in all of this. Our dear protagonist in peak mental health says he has no goal, but if he did, it would be to screw him over. As the idol watches, she realizes that the protagonist genuinely looks like a virtual villain. The protagonist continues to mock Booty Boy, until to his surprise, Booty Boy suddenly vanishes and reappears right behind him in the blink of an eye. He had activated something called GM Zone Warp. After some quick dodging and scrambling, everyone realizes that both the protagonist and Booty Boy have disappeared together. The dude just got sucked into Sukuna's budget domain expansion. Inside that domain expansion, the protagonist exchanged several blows with that scumbag. Booty Boy started questioning why the protagonist was messing with an operator, threatening to chop him into tiny pieces for a Korean dish, whose name he conveniently forgot. However, as we can see, the most damage he managed to inflict was breaking the protagonist's mask. The protagonist remarks that this guy is even more trash than he expected since he had the audacity to call a user of his own company's game a pig. He then activates one of his regeneration abilities to recover from the superficial cut. Booty Boy lunges at him again, declaring that people like him always forget about reality inside virtual games and that he was already becoming part of the system's files. That's why, in his eyes, there was no reason to treat players as humans in the first place. Their weapons clashed repeatedly, but since they had equal levels of power, neither could break the other. Upon hearing his opponent's rant, the protagonist laughs and calls him a total boomer, mocking him for blaming players for no apparent reason. He asks if this is some kind of midlife crisis. Booty Boy, clearly not taking that well, attacks him again. This time, he was so fast that the protagonist couldn't keep up, taking multiple hits at once. As he slashed away, Booty Boy ranted about how all users were the same. No matter how hard developers worked, players only saw them as insignificant people who deserved constant criticism. Try working in customer service if you want to experience real humiliation, pal. Since that line sounded a little too personal, we suddenly transition into a flashback, about 7 years ago, inside one of Chronolife's headquarters. Back then, Booty Boy was still a developer, someone who hadn't yet lost his innocence. However, to our delight, the protagonist interrupts the flashback by smacking him on the head with a stick. He sarcastically asks how he dares to pull the tragic villain backstory card, stating that he has no intention of softening the criminal first impression he gave off. And just like that, he completely cuts off the flashback. Once again, we thank him for that. After that, the fight continues in the exact same way. Essentially, it's just a cycle of devastating attacks followed by nearly invincible healing factors. One surprising detail is that the protagonist realizes that Booty Boy also has one of these insane healing factors. But considering he had an operator account, he probably abused the system to get it. And unsurprisingly, Booty Boy ends up activating yet another completely broken ability, one called Titan's Spirit. Not gonna lie, this one definitely makes him stronger. Now, with his newfound overwhelming strength, the system notifies the protagonist that this is a secret ability called Titan's Spirit. Any user who activates it receives the strength equivalent to that of a Titan. The conditions required to unlock this ability are threefold. Achieve Master Level. Have a Strength stat exceeding 14,000 points. Once both conditions are met, defeat the bear in a single hit. Booty Boy, almost turning into a Super Saiyan, started screaming as he accumulated an absurd amount of power in such a short time. At that moment, the protagonist wondered why so many winds were suddenly appearing out of nowhere. Booty Boy had finally managed to fully activate his secret ability, boosting both his attack damage and range by a ridiculous 1,000% for the duration of the skill. He then looked at the protagonist from a fair distance and casually slashed the air, sending a devastating shockwave that reached him, exploding everything around. The protagonist, reacting almost instantly, activated his Healing Factor ability, which reversed most of the damage completely. He stood back up, ready to continue the fight. This time, however, he was openly complaining about the ability Booty Boy had just used, calling it ridiculously broken and demanding that he hand it over. Booty Boy, confused, asked what he was talking about, only to suddenly see that infamous gray tentacle emerge from the protagonist's mouth and begin absorbing him. Completely caught off guard by the surprise attack, Booty Boy was stunned. The protagonist took the chance to inform him that he could steal his stats and even learn his secret abilities. However, before he could go any further, Booty Boy immediately activated another secret agility skill, making himself incredibly fast and managing to escape the protagonist's range. Without wasting time, he launched another sequence of attacks. While beating the protagonist down, he began explaining that the key to battles in the game was all about stats and calculations, and in his case, every single one of his stats was maxed out at 99,999 points. As soon as he finished his explanation, he proceeded to absolutely demolish the protagonist. Not gonna lie, I kinda enjoy watching him get wrecked after flexing so much. At this point, Booty Boy mocked him, asking if he still didn't understand that he couldn't win. No matter how skilled he was, a sheer difference in stats was simply too overwhelming. However, despite his absurd power, his controls still sucked, because in the end, he was just a loser who thought too highly of himself for reaching the maximum level. The protagonist, now clearly pissed off, slowly got back on his feet. He stated that hearing that kind of talk from someone like Booty Boy really made his blood boil, especially since he was nothing more than a lame criminal abusing operator accounts. Booty Boy smirked and asked what he was going to do about it. He added that if the protagonist hated the system so much, he should just become an operator himself. He then taunted him, asking if he was jealous and questioning why he was even playing so casually, when all it took for Booty Boy to reach his level was tweaking a few game files. Before he could say anything else, the protagonist headbutted him. The impact sent Booty Boy flying and he was not happy about it. He was now wondering how the protagonist had moved so fast despite having such low agility. The protagonist simply laughed in his face, saying that the answer was control. Regarding his secret speed ability, the protagonist dared him to try using it again. He claimed that he had no idea what skill the protagonist was about to use, but he could easily keep up with his monstrous speed. At that moment, the protagonist casually turned his back on him, then effortlessly countered his attack, landing a direct hit right in Booty Boy's face. It might have looked like pure skill, but in reality, it was just luck. The protagonist, still grinning, began mocking him. He asked how it felt to take one of his own attacks to the face. Then he explained that he had turned off autocontrol in the game settings. Once again, he asked how it felt to taste an attack powerful enough to destroy a planet. Booty Boy slowly stood back up, grumbling that he had already told him his control in the game was garbage, so he had no idea how he had even gotten hit. He brushed it off, saying the protagonist had just gotten lucky, but that wouldn't happen again. The protagonist agreed, saying that was true. Booty Boy was way slower than his secret speed ability. So, with no more need to keep dodging and jumping around, the two decided to finally settle things once and for all. Yo guys, before wrapping up, just wanted to give a massive shout out to everyone who's been liking, commenting, and sharing the videos. You're absolute legends. If it weren't for you, I'd have dropped this already, just like those manhwas that disappear without an ending. So keep showing that support, because every like is a buff to the channel, and every comment gives me +10 motivation to bring you more content. Thanks a ton, and I'll catch you in the next one.